He slammed his fist on the table so hard the wine glasses jumped, and every head in the restaurant turned. "She was worthless," Michael Whitmore snarled, grabbing his mistress by the wrist and yanking her close. "I threw that woman out like garbage, and I'd do it again tomorrow." He laughed cruel and loud, toasting the wife he had destroyed. Then the door swung open. Claire walked in pregnant, radiant, on the arm of a billionaire 10 times more powerful than him. Michael's glass shattered on the floor, and the monster who mocked her a moment ago went white as a corpse. Before we go on, please subscribe to this channel and stay with me all the way to the end because this story only gets more powerful. And leave a comment telling me what city you are watching from so I can see just how far my story has traveled tonight. Michael Whitmore had spent his whole life believing that money made a man untouchable. At 52 years old, he sat in the most expensive restaurant in Manhattan as if he owned the floor beneath it, the ceiling above it, and every person breathing in between. He had the corner table, the one they only gave to men whose names appeared in financial magazines. He had a bottle of champagne that cost more than most people earned in a week. And he had Olivia Parker, 26 years old, sitting beside him with her hand resting on his arm as though she had won a prize. To Michael, this was proof that he had made the right choice 3 years ago, proof that leaving Claire had been the smartest decision of his life. "Tell me again," Olivia said, leaning close, her voice soft and sweet the way he liked it. "Tell me about how you built the company." Michael smiled, and there was nothing warm in that smile. There was only pride. "I built it with my own 2 hands," he said. "Nobody handed me anything. I saw the future when everyone else was too scared to look at it. That's the difference between men like me and everybody else. Vision. You either have it or you spend your whole life working for the people who do." Olivia laughed, delighted, and Michael felt the glow of being admired. That glow was the only thing he truly loved anymore. He raised his glass and looked around the room at the chandeliers, at the marble, at the waiters who moved like ghosts, and he thought, "This is who I am now. This is where I belong." And the thought that pleased him most, the thought that made his chest swell, was that Claire Bennett would never sit in a room like this again. Because in Michael's mind, Claire was gone. Not just gone from his life, gone from any life worth living. He imagined her sometimes in a small apartment somewhere alone, older, tired thinking about the mistake she had made by not fighting harder to keep him. He imagined her regret, and that imagined regret gave him a strange kind of comfort, the way a cruel man is comforted by the suffering he believes he has caused. "You never talk about your ex-wife," Olivia said, tilting her head. "What was she like?" Michael waved his hand as if brushing away a fly. "Claire was a good woman," he said. "Simple, loyal, the kind of woman who was fine for the early years when I had nothing. But people outgrow things, Olivia. You outgrow a small apartment, you outgrow an old car, and sometimes you outgrow a person." "That's cold," Olivia said, but she was smiling when she said it because she thought it made her special. She thought it meant she was the upgrade. "It's not cold," Michael said. "It's honest. Do you know what Claire's biggest dream was? To sit at home, to manage the house, to be supportive." He said the word supportive as if it tasted bad. She had no ambition, no fire. She was the kind of woman who would hold a man back while telling herself she was helping him. And when I finally told her the truth, do you know what she did? What did she do? "Nothing," Michael said, and he laughed. "She just packed her bags and left. No screaming, no fighting. She just walked out the door like a woman who knew she had already lost." He drank from his glass, savoring the memory the way some men savor a victory. "She cried when I signed the papers," he said, and he said it loud enough that the couple at the next table glanced over. "Some people are just born to be left behind." He did not lower his voice. He did not care. In that moment, Michael Whitmore was exactly the man he had become, a man who mistook cruelty for strength and applause for love. He raised his glass higher. "To knowing your worth," he said, and that was the exact moment the world he had built began to crack. Because across the restaurant, the tall glass doors swung open and the entire room seemed to shift its attention all at once. Michael noticed it before he understood it. The way a crowd goes quiet when someone important arrives, the way heads turn, the way the very air changes. He turned to look, expecting a senator, a movie star, someone worthy of that much attention. And he saw her. Claire. His champagne glass slipped in his fingers. For one full second, his mind refused to accept it. This could not be Claire. This woman walked with her shoulders back and her chin level. This woman wore a dress that whispered wealth instead of shouting it. This woman had a calm on her face that Michael had never once seen in the years they were married, a calm that came from somewhere deep, somewhere untouchable. But it was her. It was Claire, and she was pregnant. Michael's eyes dropped to the gentle curve beneath her dress, and something twisted in his stomach that he did not have a name for. Claire pregnant. Claire, the woman he had convinced himself could never build a life without him, the woman he had left behind like an old car, walking into the most exclusive restaurant in New York, radiant, whole, and impossibly at peace. But she was not alone. Beside her, one hand resting protectively at the small of her back, was a man Michael recognized instantly because everyone in his world recognized that face. Alexander Sterling, the billionaire, the founder of Sterling Enterprises, the man whose company was worth 10 times what Whitmore Global would ever be. The man Michael had studied in magazines, envied from a distance, and once in a private moment he would never admit to prayed he might one day become. Alexander Sterling, with his hand on Claire's back, looking at Claire the way a man looks at the most important person in the room. Michael forgot how to breathe. "Michael," Olivia's voice came from very far away. "Michael, you're spilling your drink." He looked down. Champagne was running over his fingers and pooling on the white tablecloth, and he had not even felt it. He set the glass down with a hand that would not stay steady. "Do you know them?" Olivia asked, following his stare. "Is that Alexander Sterling? Oh my God, it is. Michael, that's Alexander Sterling." "Be quiet," Michael said, and his voice came out sharper than he meant it to. Olivia blinked, hurt, but Michael did not notice. He could not notice anything except the impossible scene unfolding in front of him, because it was not the pregnancy that shattered him. It was not even the billionaire. It was Claire's face. She looked happy, not the careful, quiet happiness she used to wear during their marriage, the happiness of a woman trying hard to make the best of things. This was different. This was the face of a woman who had stopped surviving and started living. And Michael, sitting in his corner table with his young girlfriend and his expensive champagne and his magazine name, understood in one devastating instant that he had never once made her look like that, not in 10 years of marriage, not for a single day. A stranger had done in 3 years what Michael had failed to do in a decade. "They're being seated near us," Olivia whispered, half thrilled, half afraid. "Michael, they're coming this way." Michael's mind raced. Every instinct he had, every instinct that had made him a wealthy and ruthless man, told him to take control of the situation, to be the one in charge, to decide how this went. He had spent his whole life deciding how things went, so he did what men like Michael always do. He stood up. "Michael, what are you doing?" Olivia hissed. But he was already moving, already fixing his expression into the confident, charming mask he wore in every boardroom he had ever conquered. He straightened his jacket. He put on the smile that had closed 100 deals, and he walked toward the table where the hostess was seating Claire and Alexander, because if there was one thing Michael Whitmore could not tolerate, it was being ignored. "Claire," he said, warm as sunshine, arms slightly open as if he might embrace her. "My God, Claire, I didn't expect to see you here." Claire looked up at him, and there it was again, that calm. That terrible, unshakable calm. "Neither did I," she said. 2 words. That was all. But something in the way she said them made Michael's confident smile falter at the edges. There was no anger in her voice. There was no hurt. There was no trace of the woman who had once begged him to come home earlier to look up from his phone to see her. That woman was gone. And in her place sat someone Michael did not recognize at all. "You look..." Michael started and then stopped because every word that came to mind was wrong. "You look well. You look beautiful. You look happy." Each one was true, and each one was a knife. "You look like you're doing well," he finally managed. "I am," Claire said simply. The silence stretched. Michael waited for her to fill it the way she always used to fill his silences, nervously eager to please. But Claire did not fill it. She let it sit there between them, heavy and quiet, and she watched him squirm inside it, and Michael realized with a jolt that she was completely comfortable with his discomfort. That was new. That was terrifying. "Michael Whitmore," Alexander Sterling said, and rose from his chair, extending his hand. His voice was even pleasant, unbothered. "I've heard of your company, Whitmore Global. You've done some interesting work." Michael turned to him, and for the first time in years, he felt something he could not name. He shook Alexander's hand and he waited for it. He waited for the flicker of competition, the sizing up the male instinct to measure and be measured. It was a game Michael knew well. It was a game he always won. But it did not come. Alexander Sterling shook his hand the way a man shakes the hand of someone entirely unimportant to him. Polite, warm even, but without a single trace of the tension that comes when two powerful men recognize each other as rivals. Alexander was not competing with him. Alexander did not need to. And nothing in Michael's entire life had ever made him feel smaller than that easy, indifferent handshake. "Thank you," Michael said, and his voice came out thin. "You should join us for a drink," Alexander said, and it was such a generous thing to say, such a kind and effortless thing that it landed like an insult. Because a rival does not invite you for a drink. A rival guards his territory. Only a man who feels no threat from you at all can afford to be that gracious. Michael understood this, and it burned. "I have my own table," Michael said, and gestured vaguely toward Olivia, who was watching the whole scene with wide, uncertain eyes. "I'm here with someone." "Of course," Alexander said, smiling. "Another time." There would be no other time, and both men knew it. Michael looked back at Claire. He needed something from her. He did not fully understand what. Maybe an apology for existing so beautifully. Maybe a reaction. Maybe just the smallest crack in that maddening calm, some proof that he still had power over her, that he had ever had power over her. "You're expecting," he said, nodding at the curve of her belly, and immediately hated how the word sounded clumsy and small. "Yes," Claire said. "Congratulations," Michael said. The word turned to ash in his mouth. "Thank you, Michael." And there it was again. She said his name without weight, without history, as if he were an acquaintance she had met once at a party, 10 years of marriage, a divorce that had broken her open, and she said his name as if it meant nothing at all. Michael had come to this table to take control. He was leaving it with the dawning horrible awareness that there was no control left to take. Claire had not moved on the way people move on bitterly, with the old wound still tender beneath the surface. She had moved on completely. She had built a life so far beyond him that he was not even a wound anymore. He was just a name, a closed chapter. A man she had left behind exactly as he had once described her, except she had done it without cruelty and he had done it with a champagne toast and a laugh. The irony hit him so hard he almost sat down. "Well," Michael said, forcing the smile back onto his face, forcing his voice into something that sounded like grace. "It was good to see you, Claire. I'm glad you're happy." "That's kind of you," Claire said, and she meant it. That was the worst part. She was not being sarcastic. She was not scoring points. She had simply reached a place so far past caring what Michael thought that his approval and his disapproval were exactly the same thing to her. Weightless, meaningless, air. Michael turned and walked back to his table on legs that did not feel like his own. "What was that?" Olivia demanded the moment he sat down. "You looked like you'd seen a ghost. Michael, that was Alexander Sterling. Do you have any idea what he's worth? And that woman, who was she? The way you looked at her, Michael, who was she?" Michael reached for his champagne glass. His hand was still shaking. "Nobody," he said. "She's nobody." But even as he said it, he knew it was a lie. And worse, he knew that the lie was old. He had been telling it for 3 years. She's nobody. She's simple. She's a woman who was fine for the early years. He had told that lie so many times that he had come to believe it, and now the truth was sitting 20 feet away in a designer dress with a billionaire's hand at her back, and the truth was demolishing his lie in front of his eyes. Claire had never been nobody. Claire had been the foundation, and he had been so busy admiring the building that he had never once looked down to see what was holding it up. "You're sweating," Olivia said. "Are you okay? You don't look okay." "I'm fine," Michael snapped. But he was not fine. He was watching out of the corner of his eye as the most powerful people in the room began to drift toward Claire and Alexander's table. He recognized them. He knew their names, investors he had chased for years, executives who had ignored his calls, a woman from a private equity firm who had once kept him waiting 45 minutes and then canceled. One by one, they came to Claire and Alexander, smiling, warm, eager, the way people are only ever warm and eager around those they consider their equals or their betters. These were his people. These were the people he had spent his whole life trying to impress, and they were gathering around the woman he had thrown away, drawn to her like she was the center of gravity in the room. "How does she know all of them?" Olivia asked, and there was something almost accusing in her voice now, as if Michael had lied to her about who he was. "I don't know," Michael said. But that was another lie, because he was beginning to understand. Claire had not simply married up. Claire had built something. He did not know what, yet he did not know how, but he could see it in the way those powerful people leaned toward her, listened to her, laughed at what she said. That was not the deference people show to a rich man's wife. That was the respect people show to someone who has earned her place. Somewhere in the last 3 years, while Michael was toasting himself in restaurants and telling young women that Claire had no ambition and no fire, Claire had been quietly becoming someone the whole room wanted to know. The champagne tasted like nothing now. Michael thought back unwillingly to the last conversation they had ever really had, the night he told her. He had rehearsed it the way he rehearsed everything. He had chosen his words to be clean and final, and in his own mind, merciful. "You're a wonderful person, Claire," he had said, "but I don't think you're the woman I need anymore." He had expected her to cry. He had expected her to argue, to beg, to remind him of everything she had sacrificed. He had almost wanted her to, because a part of him needed to feel like the strong one, the one being fought for the prize being chased. But Claire had not cried in front of him. She had not begged. She had stood very still for a long moment, and then she had said something he had spent 3 years trying to forget. "Okay, Michael," she had said quietly. "I hope she's worth what you're about to lose." He had thought at the time that she meant Olivia. He had thought Claire was jealous, threatened warning him off her replacement. He had smiled at that. He had felt powerful. Now, sitting in a restaurant full of people who had chosen Claire over him, without even knowing there had ever been a choice to make Michael finally understood what she had meant. She had not been talking about the woman he was leaving her for. She had been talking about herself. "I hope she's worth what you're about to lose." Michael Whitmore set down his glass, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt afraid. Not the sharp fear of a bad quarter or a failed deal. Something deeper. The slow, cold fear of a man who is beginning to suspect that he has spent his entire life measuring the wrong things, valuing the wrong things, chasing the wrong things, and that the bill for all of it is about to come due. "Michael," Olivia said, and now her voice had changed too, had lost some of its sweetness, had picked up an edge of something colder, more calculating. "Is your company okay? I heard there was some kind of problem with a big deal, some partnership. Is that true?" Michael's head snapped toward her. "Where did you hear that?" "People talk," Olivia said, and shrugged, and the shrug told Michael everything he needed to know about how much she actually cared for him. "I just want to make sure everything's fine. For you, I mean. For you." But her eyes were already drifting back toward the table across the room, toward the billionaire and the pregnant woman and the crowd of powerful people gathered around them like moths around a flame. And Michael understood in that moment that Olivia had never loved him at all. She had loved his money. She had loved his name in the magazines. She had loved the version of Michael Whitmore that was successful and rising and untouchable. And that version of Michael Whitmore had just watched his own foundation walk through the door with somebody else. "Everything's fine," Michael said. It was the third lie he had told in 10 minutes, and it was the biggest one. Because the truth, though, he would not learn the full weight of it until the next morning, was that everything was very far from fine. The truth was that the partnership Olivia had heard whispers about was not a rumor. The truth was that Sterling Enterprises, Alexander Sterling's empire, had been in quiet talks with Whitmore Global for months about a deal worth hundreds of millions of dollars, a deal that Michael had been counting on, a deal that his investors had been counting on, a deal that was in many ways the difference between Whitmore Global's future and its collapse. And the truth was that Michael had no idea, sitting there in that restaurant, that the man whose hand he had just shaken, the man who had so graciously invited him for a drink, was the very man who held that deal in his hands. He did not know it yet, but he was about to. Michael looked across the room one final time. Claire was laughing at something Alexander had said, one hand resting gently on the curve of her belly. Her face lit up with a joy so genuine that it made Michael's chest ache in a way he did not have the words for. And Alexander was looking at her the way a man looks at someone he considers not a possession, not an accessory, not an upgrade, but a partner, an equal, a person he was building a life beside, rather than a person building a life behind him. Michael had never once looked at Claire that way. He had looked at her as support, as foundation, as the reliable and glamorous thing that held his glamorous life in place. And when the glamour got bright enough, he had looked at the foundation and decided it was beneath him, and he had torn it out, and he had watched his life continue to stand, and he had thought, see, I never needed it after all. He had been wrong. He was only just beginning to understand how wrong. I want to go, Michael said, suddenly standing up, throwing his napkin onto the table. Get your coat. We're leaving. But we haven't even ordered, Olivia protested. I said we're leaving. Olivia stared at him, and something in her expression hardened, some final calculation, completing itself behind her pretty eyes. You know what, Michael, she said slowly, gathering her purse. I think maybe I'll stay a little longer. Rebecca's here. I saw her come in. I'll get a car home. And there it was. The first rat leaving the first small hole in the ship. Michael looked at her, at this young woman he had left his wife for, this young woman who had made him feel admired and powerful and worthy, and he saw the truth of her at last. She had never been his. She had been renting him for as long as the view was good, and the view was no longer good. Fine, Michael said. He walked out of the restaurant alone. He did not look back at Claire. He could not. But as he pushed through the tall glass doors and out into the cold Manhattan night, one thought followed him, sharp and relentless, refusing to be shaken loose. She looked so happy. She looked so happy, and I never made her look like that, not once, not in 10 years. And a stranger did it in 3. Michael stood on the sidewalk, the city glittering cold and indifferent all around him, and for the first time in a very long time, he did not feel like the most powerful man in the room. He felt like a man who had just seen laid out in front of him, with perfect and merciless clarity, the exact shape of everything he had thrown away. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out. A text from his chief financial officer sent at 11:40 at night, which was never a good sign because his chief financial officer did not text him at night unless something was wrong. The text read, Michael, call me first thing tomorrow. We have a serious problem with the Sterling deal. Do not talk to any press until we speak. Michael stared at the screen. The Sterling deal. Alexander Sterling. The man whose hand he had just shaken. The man with his palm resting on Claire's back. The man who had invited him so kindly for a drink. Michael's blood turned to ice. He looked back through the glass doors of the restaurant, back at the warm and golden room he had just fled, and he could still see them, Claire and Alexander, at the center of everything, surrounded by the very people Michael had spent his whole life trying to become. And he understood finally and fully that the woman he had thrown away had not just moved on. She had moved up, into a world so far above him that the man beside her could crush Michael's entire empire without ever raising his voice, without ever losing his gracious smile, without ever needing to feel a single thing about it at all. She's nobody, he had told Olivia. She's simple. She's a woman who was fine for the early years. Michael Whitmore stood alone on the cold sidewalk and read the text from his chief financial officer one more time, and the confident smile that had closed 100 deals was nowhere to be found on his face, because for the first time in his life, Michael was beginning to understand a truth that would take everything from him before it finally set him free. He had not left Claire because she was holding him back. He had left her because he could not stand beside a woman who was better than him. And now he was about to find out exactly what that had cost. The phone buzzed again in his hand. Another text. This one said, "It's worse than you think." Michael closed his eyes. Somewhere behind those glass doors, his ex-wife was laughing, her hand resting on the child she was carrying, in the arms of a man who had every reason in the world to make sure Michael Whitmore never rose again. And Michael, standing alone in the dark, finally began to understand that the night everything changed had not been the night 3 years ago, when he signed the divorce papers with a smug little flourish and told himself he was free. The night everything changed was tonight, and it was only just beginning. Michael Whitmore did not sleep that night. He sat in the dark of his luxury apartment, overlooking a city that no longer felt like his, staring at his phone, reading the same 2 texts over and over until the words stopped making sense. "We have a serious problem with the Sterling deal. It's worse than you think." He told himself it was a mistake. He told himself his chief financial officer was panicking the way finance people always panicked, seeing disaster in every shadow. He told himself that by morning it would all be nothing. But somewhere underneath the lies he was telling himself, Michael already knew. He knew the moment he had shaken Alexander Sterling's hand and felt nothing come back. No competition, no fear, no respect, just the polite indifference of a man who could end you and would not even remember doing it. At 6 in the morning, before the sun had fully come up, Michael was already dressed and pacing. At 6:15, he called James Coleman, his chief financial officer, a man who had been with Whitmore Global for 11 years and had never once raised his voice. James answered on the first ring. "Tell me it's not what I think it is," Michael said. There was a long silence on the other end, long enough that Michael's stomach dropped through the floor. "Sterling Enterprises pulled out," James said quietly. "Late last night. The whole partnership, everything we've been building for 8 months, gone." Michael closed his eyes. "Why?" he said. It came out flat, barely a question. "They didn't give a reason. That's the part that scares me, Michael. When a company like Sterling walks away from a deal this size, they give a reason. A number that didn't work, a due diligence flag, something. But they didn't give us anything. Their lawyer sent a 2-line email, effective immediately, no explanation." Michael sat down slowly in the nearest chair. "That's not how business works," James went on, and now Michael could hear the fear underneath the professionalism. "You don't blow up a $300 million deal on a whim. Unless it isn't business. Unless it's personal." The word hung in the air between them. Personal. Michael thought of Claire's calm face across the restaurant. He thought of the way Alexander had rested his hand on her back. He thought of the gracious, effortless invitation, "You should join us for a drink." And he understood in a single sickening rush that Alexander Sterling had known exactly who he was the moment Michael walked up to that table, had known the whole time, had shaken his hand while already holding the knife. "Michael," James said. "Are you there?" "I'm here," Michael said. "The board wants an emergency meeting, 10 o'clock. They're already asking questions and I don't have answers. And Michael, I need to be honest with you because you pay me to be honest. If we can't replace this partnership fast, we are in real trouble. Not next quarter trouble, now trouble." Michael hung up without saying goodbye. He sat in the growing light with the phone in his hand, and for the first time he let himself say the truth out loud alone in the empty apartment where a wife used to live. "She did this." But even as he said it, a smaller, quieter voice underneath answered him. "No, you did this. 3 years ago. You just didn't know the bill was coming." To understand how Michael Whitmore ended up sitting alone in the dark at dawn watching his empire crack, you have to go back. Back before the Billionaire. Back before the divorce. Back to when Claire Bennett was the only reason there was a Whitmore Global at all. Because there was a version of this story Michael had spent 3 years rewriting in his own mind. In his version, he had built the company alone. With his own 2 hands, he liked to say, "Nobody handed me anything." He had told that story so many times in so many interviews and dinners and bedrooms that he had come to believe it completely. But it was not true. In the beginning, there had been nothing. A rented office the size of a closet, a single computer, a dream that everyone but Claire thought was foolish. Michael had wanted to quit his stable job to build something of his own, and every reasonable person in his life had told him he was crazy. His father had told him he was throwing away a good career. His friends had laughed. The bank had turned him down. Only one person had believed him. "Do it," Claire had said 12 years ago, sitting across from him at a kitchen table with cracked linoleum in an apartment they could barely afford. "Quit. Build it. I'll cover us until it works." "And if it doesn't work?" Michael had asked. Claire had reached across the table and taken his hands. "Then we fail together and we figure out what's next," she had said. "But I am not going to watch you spend your whole life wondering. Do it, Michael. I believe in you." So he did it. And for the first 2 years, it did not work. It nearly killed them. Michael would come home gray with exhaustion, convinced he had wasted everything, ready to give up. And Claire, who had taken a second job to keep them afloat, who was working herself to the bone so that Michael could chase a dream that kept failing, would sit him down and refuse to let him quit. "One more month," she would say. "Just one more month. And if it's still not working in a month, we'll talk. But not tonight. Tonight you rest, and tomorrow you go back and you fight." There was a night deep in that second brutal year that Michael had completely broken down. A major investor had pulled out. The company was weeks from collapse. Michael had come home and told Claire it was over, that he had failed, that he was going to close the doors and go back to a normal job and forget he had ever tried. And Claire had done something he never forgot, or at least something he had never forgotten, until the money made him forget everything. She had gone into their bedroom and come back with a small box. Inside was her mother's ring, the one thing of real value she owned, the one thing she had sworn she would never part with. "Sell it," she had said, pressing it into his hands. "Make payroll, keep the lights on, buy yourself one more month." "Claire, I can't." "You can. You will. Because I am not letting your dream die over a piece of jewelry." She had closed his fingers around the box. "It's just a ring, Michael. You're my husband. There's no contest." Michael had sold the ring. He had made payroll. He had bought one more month. And in that month, everything changed. The idea finally caught. A client said yes, and then another, and then the whole thing began to move slowly at first, then faster, then like something unstoppable. Whitmore Global was born not from Michael's 2 hands, but from Claire's mother's ring, and Claire's second job, and Claire's refusal to let him quit on the nights when he had nothing left. He never bought the ring back. For a long time, he told himself he would. When the company was bigger, when they had more money, when the time was right. And then the company got bigger, and they had more money, and the time was never right, and eventually Michael stopped thinking about the ring at all, because by then the money had started doing to Michael what money does to a certain kind of man. It made him forget where he came from. It made him forget who carried him there. As Whitmore Global grew, Michael changed, and he changed so slowly that Claire almost didn't notice it happening. He started staying late. Then, later. He started taking calls at dinner, then skipping dinner, then forgetting there had ever been a dinner to skip. He started going to events, glittering events full of important people, and he started noticing that the important people had a certain kind of wife, young, polished, decorative. And he started, God help him, looking at his own wife and seeing not the woman who had sold her mother's ring for him, but a woman who did not quite fit the room he now lived in. "You should come to the gala on Friday," he told her once, and then before she could answer, "Actually, don't worry about it. It's a lot of boring business people. You'd be bored." Claire had looked at him for a long moment. "You don't want me there," she said. Not angry, just quiet. "That's not what I said. It's what you meant." And Michael, who was already becoming a man who could not admit he was wrong, had gotten angry instead of honest. "You know what your problem is, Claire. You read too much into everything. I said you'd be bored, that's all. Not everything is an attack." But it was an attack, and they both knew it, and it was only the first of 1,000 small ones. Michael began comparing her out loud to other women, to the wife of a partner who had launched her own fashion line, to a colleague half his age who talked about ambition and disruption and vision, all the words Michael loved. He began treating Claire's steadiness, the very steadiness that had saved his life, as a flaw, as smallness, as a lack of fire. He forgot that her steadiness was the only reason he was standing. "I don't understand you anymore," Claire told him one night near the end, though neither of them knew it was near the end yet. "You used to talk to me about everything. Now you look at me like I'm furniture." "I'm tired, Claire," Michael said, not looking up from his phone. "I run a company. Do you have any idea the pressure I'm under?" "I ran that company with you when it was nothing," she said. "I sold my mother's ring for that company. Don't tell me I don't understand pressure." And Michael, in one of the cruelest moments of a life that was becoming full of them, had said the thing that told Claire exactly who he had become. "That was a long time ago," he said. "Things are different now. I'm different now. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe I've grown and you're still standing in that old apartment waiting for a version of me that doesn't exist anymore." Claire had gone very still. "Yes," she had said softly. "Maybe I am." He had thought he'd won that argument. He always thought he won. The night Michael ended it, he had rehearsed his words for a week. He wanted it clean. He wanted to be in his own mind merciful. He sat Claire down at the same kitchen table where she had once told him to chase his dream. Except now the table was in a penthouse and the linoleum was long gone, and he told her in the calm voice of a man reading a business decision that he did not think she was the woman he needed anymore. He had expected tears. He had expected pleading. Some part of him had wanted it because a man being fought for gets to feel important. But Claire did not cry in front of him. She sat very still, and something moved across her face, some final understanding settling into place. And then she did something Michael had not prepared for at all. She thanked him. "Thank you, Michael," she said quietly. He blinked. "What?" "For finally being honest. For 3 years, I felt like I was going crazy, like I was married to a stranger who kept telling me I was the one who'd changed. And now you've said it out loud and I finally know I wasn't imagining it." She stood up. "You've been gone a long time. You just needed to say it before I could stop waiting for you to come back." "Claire, I hope she's worth what you're about to lose," Claire said. And she walked out of the room and out of the marriage and out of his life without a single tear falling where he could see it, and Michael had told himself for 3 years that her calm meant she had lost, that she had accepted her defeat, that she had walked away because she knew she couldn't do better than him. He had gotten it exactly backwards. Claire had not fallen apart after the divorce. She had done the opposite. She had walked out of that penthouse, and for the first time in a decade, she had asked herself a question Michael had never once let her ask. What do I actually want? The answer had been waiting inside her the whole time. Before Michael, before the company that ate their marriage alive, Claire had studied sustainable business development. She had been good at it, better than good, with a mind for the kind of long-term thinking that most companies were too greedy or too scared to attempt. She had set all of that aside to support Michael's dream. She had told herself it was temporary, and then temporary had become permanent, and her own dream had gone so quiet she almost forgot it had ever made a sound. The divorce woke it back up. She took a small settlement less than she was owed because she wanted out clean more than she wanted to fight, and she used it to start something of her own. A tiny consulting firm. 1 woman, 1 laptop, a rented desk in a shared office. Everyone she knew told her it was too late, that she was too old to start over, that she should find something safe. Claire had heard that speech before. 12 years earlier, she had heard everyone say it to Michael, and she had been the one person who told him to do it anyway. This time she said it to herself. She built the firm the way she had once helped Michael build his quietly, stubbornly, 1 client at a time. But there was a difference this time, a difference that would eventually change everything. This time she was building it for herself. And a person building something for themselves has a kind of fire that no one can borrow and no one can fake. Her firm was small, but it was different. And in a market crowded with people saying the same things, different got noticed. She had a way of walking into a struggling company and seeing not just what was broken, but what was possible. She had a way of telling powerful people the truth they didn't want to hear gently, but without flinching, that made them trust her more than the people who only told them what they wanted. Within a year, she had a waiting list. Within 2, she had a reputation. And in the middle of that second year, she got a call that would change the shape of her whole life. A call from the office of Alexander Sterling. Sterling Enterprises was one of the most respected technology companies in America, and Alexander Sterling was the kind of man whose calendar was guarded like a fortress. He did not take meetings with one-woman consulting firms, and yet someone in his organization had heard Claire speak at a small conference, had watched her dismantle a bad strategy in front of a room of executives with nothing but calm and clarity, and had gone back and told Alexander Sterling that he needed to meet this woman. So he did. Claire almost didn't go. She was terrified, though she would never have admitted it. She had spent 10 years being told by her own husband that she was simple, that she lacked ambition, that she was fine for the early years, but not for the big rooms. And now she was being asked to walk into the biggest room of all. She almost let the old voice win. Michael's voice. You'd be bored. You'd be out of place. Stay home. Instead, she put on her best suit and she walked in. Alexander Sterling had expected a consultant. What he got was a partner in disguise. He would tell her much later that it took him about 10 minutes to realize she was smarter than most of the people he paid a fortune to advise him. She did not flatter him. She did not perform. She looked at a problem his entire executive team had been circling for months, and she saw the thing they had all missed, and she said it plainly, and she was right. "Where have you been?" he had asked her, half joking at the end of that first meeting. "Married to the wrong man," she had said before she could stop herself, and then flushed, mortified. But Alexander had only laughed, a real laugh, and something had passed between them that neither of them named for a long time. Because here is the thing, Michael never understood the thing he could not understand because he was not built to understand it. Alexander Sterling did not need Claire. He was a billionaire. He could have had any woman in the country decorative and young and impressed by his money. He did not fall for Claire because she needed saving. He fell for her because she didn't. He fell for the way she stood beside him instead of behind him. He fell for the fact that she would tell him he was wrong to his face in a boardroom and be right. He fell for a woman who had built something from nothing with her own hands, who knew exactly what she was worth, who did not shrink in the biggest rooms because she had finally stopped believing the man who spent a decade telling her to. Their relationship grew slowly. Neither of them was in a hurry. Claire had spent 10 years being someone's foundation, and she was in no rush to become someone's anything again. But Alexander never asked her to be his foundation. He asked her to be his equal. And for the first time in her entire adult life, a man looked at Claire Bennett and saw not what she could do for him, but who she already was. By the time Claire found out she was pregnant, she was already in love and already quietly becoming one of the most respected voices in an industry that had no idea she had spent a decade being told she had no ambition. And Alexander Sterling, who missed almost nothing, had noticed something else along the way. He had heard the name Whitmore. He had heard it in Claire's rare, careful references to her past, in the way her voice went flat and small when the old marriage came up. He had put the pieces together long before Michael ever walked up to that restaurant table. So when Sterling Enterprises' strategy team came to him months ago with a promising partnership opportunity with a mid-sized firm called Whitmore Global, Alexander had done something he almost never did. He had smiled a cold little smile, and he had said, "Let's take the meetings. Let's do all the due diligence. Let's get right up to the edge of signing." His team had thought he was being cautious. He was being something else entirely. Which brings us back to the morning after the restaurant, to Michael Whitmore sitting in an emergency board meeting at 10 o'clock, watching his life come apart in a conference room. The mood in the room was funeral quiet. 12 board members, most of whom had invested in Michael when he was charming and rising and untouchable, sat around the long table and stared at him with expressions ranging from worry to something much colder. "Explain to us," said Harold Grant, the eldest and most powerful of them, "how we lose a $300 million partnership overnight with no warning and no explanation." Michael stood at the head of the table, and for the first time in years, he did not have a confident answer ready. "Sterling Enterprises made a business decision," he said. "It happens. Deals fall through. We'll find another partner." "Deals do not fall through like this," Harold said, in 2 lines, with no reason. "I've been in this business for 40 years, Michael. I know what it looks like when a company walks away from the numbers. This is not that. This looks like a company walking away from a person." He let the words settle. "So I'll ask you plainly. Is there something between you and Alexander Sterling that we need to know about?" And there it was, the question Michael had been dreading since dawn. He could have told the truth. He could have said, "My ex-wife is engaged to Alexander Sterling, and I think he's doing this to punish me." But saying that would mean admitting that his own past, his own choices, his own cruelty had walked into the company's future and burned it down. It would mean the board learning that the man they had trusted with their money had been destroyed not by market forces, but by the wife he threw away. So Michael did what he always did. He lied. "There's nothing," he said. "I barely know the man. I met him once last night at a restaurant. We shook hands, that's it." Half of it was true. That made it easier. Harold studied him for a long, uncomfortable moment. "For your sake," he said finally. "I hope that's true, because if it comes out that this company is in free fall over some personal grudge you failed to disclose, this board will not protect you. Do you understand me? We will not go down with you. We will not go down with you." Michael understood. He understood perfectly. These men had never been his friends. They had been his passengers along for the ride, while the ride was smooth, and now that the road was breaking apart, they were already looking for the exits, already calculating how to save themselves and leave him buried in the wreckage. The same way Olivia had looked at the door the moment she smelled trouble. The same way Michael was slowly realizing everyone in his life looked at him, because he had built a life full of people who admired his success and not one single person who loved him. He had traded the woman who sold her mother's ring for a room full of people waiting to abandon him. The meeting ended without resolution, which in a crisis is its own kind of verdict. As the board members filed out, Harold paused beside Michael and said low so the others couldn't hear, "Fix this fast, Michael, or start planning for the end. I've seen men lose everything over less than what's sitting in this room right now." Then he left, and Michael was alone. He should have gone back to work. He should have started calling other potential partners, other investors, anyone who might fill the crater Sterling Enterprises had left in his company's future. That was what a smart businessman would do. Instead, Michael did something that made no sense, something driven by a need he did not fully understand. He called Claire. He had kept her number for 3 years, telling himself it was for practical reasons, though there had never been anything practical about it. It rang 3 times, and Michael's heart pounded like a boy's, and then a voice answered, and it was not Claire. It was Alexander Sterling. "Michael Whitmore." Alexander said pleasant and calm, as if he had been expecting the call, as if he had perhaps been waiting for it. "I wondered if you'd reach out." Michael's throat went dry. "I need to speak to Claire." "She's resting," Alexander said. "She's pregnant, in case you didn't notice last night. She needs her rest. I'm sure you understand, given how carefully you looked after her when she was your wife." The words were gentle. The blade underneath was not. "You pulled the deal," Michael said. He could not stop himself. "You pulled the Sterling partnership, because of her, because of Claire." There was a pause on the line, and when Alexander spoke again, his voice had lost its warmth, and something quieter and far more dangerous had taken its place. "Let me tell you something, Michael," he said. "I did all the due diligence on your company, months of it, and do you know what I found? A firm that's been coasting on one good idea for 8 years, run by a man who takes all the credit and none of the responsibility. Your numbers were mediocre. Your leadership was worse. Under normal circumstances, I would have passed on Whitmore Global purely on the merits, and you'd never have known I looked." Michael gripped the phone. "But then," Alexander went on, "I found out something the numbers didn't tell me. I found out whose company it really was. I found out about the ring Michael, the one she sold, the one you never bought back. Claire doesn't talk about you much, but she talked about that. It's the only time I've ever seen her cry about the past." Michael's stomach turned to ice. "So no," Alexander said. "I didn't blow up your deal to hurt you. I want to be very clear about that because I don't want you flattering yourself. I don't care enough about you to want to hurt you. I pulled the deal because I looked closely at your company, the way I look closely at everything, and I decided I did not want Sterling Enterprises or Claire or our child anywhere near a man like you. That's all this was. Not revenge, just standards. Not revenge, just standards." It was without question the most devastating thing anyone had ever said to Michael Whitmore, because revenge at least would have meant he mattered. Revenge would have meant Alexander Sterling had lain awake, thinking about him, plotting his downfall, giving him weight and importance in his mind. But this was worse. This was a man swatting away an insect. This was a man wiping something off the bottom of his shoe. Michael's entire empire, the thing he had built, his whole identity, on the thing he had sacrificed his marriage for, was to Alexander Sterling, nothing more than a due diligence footnote, a company that failed a standard, a name he would forget by dinner. "You don't know anything about me," Michael said, and even to his own ears it sounded weak. "I know you had a woman who sold her mother's ring to save your company," Alexander said, "and you thanked her by telling her she wasn't the woman you needed anymore. That's all I need to know about you, Michael. That tells me everything." A pause. "Don't call this number again, and don't contact Claire. She's finished with you. She was finished with you a long time ago. You're the only one who's still hanging on." The line went dead. Michael sat alone in the empty conference room, holding a phone that no longer had anyone on the other end, and for the first time since the night before, the anger drained out of him and left something much worse behind. Shame. Because Alexander was right about all of it, and the thing that hollowed Michael out completely was the realization that Alexander had not needed to dig for any of it. He had not needed spies or investigators or secrets. He had simply looked at Michael's life honestly, the way Michael had never once looked at it himself, and he had seen exactly what was there. A man who took credit. A man who abandoned the person who carried him. A man who mistook cruelty for strength for so long that he had forgotten there was any other kind. Michael put the phone down on the table, and in the silence a memory came to him unbidden, sharper than any he'd allowed himself in years. Claire 12 years ago, pressing a small box into his hands. "It's just a ring, Michael. You're my husband. There's no contest. There's no contest." She had chosen him over the only valuable thing she owned without a moment's hesitation, because that was who she was. And when the moment came for him to choose her, he had chosen a younger woman and a better view and a name in a magazine. There's no contest. He had made it a contest, and he had lost. Michael's phone buzzed against the table. He looked down, half hoping in some pathetic corner of his heart that it might be Claire calling back, that she might have overheard, that she might feel something, anything. It was not Claire. It was a text from James, his chief financial officer, and it contained 4 words that told Michael his morning was about to get even worse. 2 more investors called. Michael closed his eyes. He knew what it meant. He had seen it happen to other men, other companies. Once the fear started, it spread like fire in dry grass. One investor gets nervous, then another, then they start talking to each other, and then panic becomes a stampede, and a company that was merely wounded in the morning is bleeding out by afternoon. The Sterling deal had been the first crack. Now the whole structure was starting to give. He typed back with a hand that was not quite steady. What did they want? The reply came fast. They want to know if the rumors are true, that Sterling walked because of something personal, that you hid it from the board. Michael, people are talking. This is moving faster than I've ever seen. Michael stared at the words. People are talking. Of course they were. In his world, in the small gilded world of people rich enough to matter, gossip traveled at the speed of light. And there was no gossip more delicious than the fall of a man who had spent years looking down on everyone. He could imagine them already at their lunches, and their galas leaning in close, lowering their voices. "Did you hear about Whitmore? His ex-wife is with Alexander Sterling." Sterling gutted his company. Apparently, it's all because of some ring, some sordid history. The man abandoned her when she was penniless. And now look, have you heard? Have you heard? The very people he had spent his life trying to impress were now feasting on his ruin. And the woman who had once been his only true friend in the world, the only person who had ever loved him for anything other than his success, was resting peacefully in a billionaire's home, carrying a child that would never know Michael's name, protected by a man who found Michael too small even to hate. Michael did the only thing left to him, the thing men like him always do when honesty and repentance are on the table and denial is on the floor. He bent down and he picked denial up off the floor. He sat up straight. He wiped his face. He told himself that Claire had turned Alexander against him. He told himself that this was an attack, a coordinated campaign, that a jealous ex-wife had poisoned a powerful man's mind, and that he, Michael, was the real victim here. He told himself that if he could just talk to Claire, just get 5 minutes with her alone, away from Sterling's influence, he could remind her of who they used to be, and he could fix all of this. It was a lie, the most dangerous lie yet, because it was the one that would keep him from ever facing the truth. But Michael grabbed it with both hands because the alternative, looking clearly at what he had done and who he had become, was more than he could bear. "She'll talk to me," he said out loud to the empty room. "I just have to get to her, away from him. She'll remember. She'll understand." He did not yet know that this decision, this refusal to face himself, would drive him to do the most desperate and shameful thing of his entire life. He did not yet know that in trying to force his way back into Claire's world, he would reach for a weapon so cruel that it would finally permanently burn away the last shred of anyone's sympathy for him. He did not know any of that yet. He knew only that his company was dying, that his mistress had left, that his board was circling, and that somewhere across the city, his ex-wife was happier than he had ever made her in the arms of a man who could destroy Michael without breaking a sweat. And Michael Whitmore, instead of asking the one question that might have saved his soul, "What did I do?" made the decision that would take him all the way down to the bottom of everything he had built. He decided to fight. He decided that if he could not have Claire's love, he would settle for her attention. And there was one thing he knew, one terrible, ruthless thing that would force even the calmest woman in New York to finally look at him again. He reached for his phone, and he called his lawyer. The lawyer's name was Richard Kane, and he was the kind of attorney men like Michael kept on retainer for exactly the kind of thing Michael was about to ask him to do. "I need to know my options," Michael said, pacing his office with the phone pressed hard against his ear. "Regarding my ex-wife, regarding the child she's carrying." There was a pause. "The child that isn't yours," Richard said carefully. "That's not established." "Michael," Richard's voice was flat, "you've been divorced for 3 years. The child is obviously Alexander Sterling's. What exactly are you asking me to do?" And here Michael reached the fork in the road that every man reaches at least once in his life. The moment where two paths open and one leads down, and something in you knows it leads down, and you take it anyway. "I want to file a claim," Michael said. "Something, anything. I want to raise a question about the paternity, about the timeline. I want to force a legal process that requires her cooperation. I want her in a courtroom, Richard. I want her to have to deal with me." The silence on the other end lasted a long time. "You understand what you're saying?" Richard said finally. "You want to use a lawsuit, a fake lawsuit over a child that isn't yours to force contact with a woman who wants nothing to do with you. That's not a legal strategy, Michael. That's harassment with a filing fee." "I'm paying you to find the legal version of it. And if I tell you there isn't one, then I'll find a lawyer who's more creative," Michael said coldly. Richard let out a long breath. Michael could hear him deciding something could hear a decent man weighing his paycheck against his conscience, and he could hear the exact moment the paycheck won, because it usually did. "There's a narrow thing," Richard said slowly. "Very narrow, very ugly. If we frame it around the timeline of your divorce, and we claim there's a question about when the relationship with Sterling began, we could file a petition asking for clarification of paternity. It would almost certainly get dismissed, but it would require a response. It would require her to engage. It would drag Sterling into it publicly, and it would be in the record." "Do it," Michael said. "Michael, I need you to hear me. This will not win. This is not designed to win. The only thing this accomplishes is hurting a pregnant woman and embarrassing a very powerful man. Sterling has more lawyers than we have staplers. When this fails, and it will fail loudly. Are you sure?" Michael thought about Claire's calm face across the restaurant. He thought about Alexander's voice on the phone. "I don't care enough about you to want to hurt you." He thought about the whole gilded world laughing at his fall. And in that moment, Michael Whitmore made the worst decision of a life that had been full of them. He chose to be seen as a villain rather than to be unseen entirely. Because to a certain kind of man, being hated is more bearable than being forgotten. "File it," he said, Today." He hung up before Richard could talk him out of it. What Michael did not understand, what he was constitutionally incapable of understanding, was that he had just handed Claire and Alexander the one thing they had been missing. Up until this moment, Michael had merely been a sad chapter in Claire's past, a man she had escaped, someone she pitied more than hated. His attack on the deal had been Alexander's doing, and Claire had barely been involved. She had spent the morning after the restaurant not thinking about Michael at all, but resting, hand on her belly, planning a nursery, living a life so far beyond him that he had genuinely ceased to matter. Michael's lawsuit changed that, not because it scared her. It didn't. But because it woke something in her that she had kept sleeping for 3 years, out of grace, out of exhaustion, out of a desire to simply be free of him. It woke the truth. The petition was filed at 2 in the afternoon. By 4, Alexander Sterling knew about it because a man like Alexander Sterling had people whose entire job was to know about things like that within hours. He did not react the way Michael expected. He did not rage. He did not immediately unleash his army of lawyers. Instead, Alexander walked into the sunroom where Claire was sitting with a book she wasn't really reading, and he knelt down beside her chair and he took her hand. "I need to tell you something," he said gently, "and I need you to stay calm, because getting upset isn't good for you or the baby." Claire looked at him. She had learned to read this man in the time they'd been together, and she saw immediately that something had happened. "It's Michael," she said, not a question. Alexander nodded. "He's filed a paternity petition, questioning whether the baby is mine. It's baseless. It's designed to fail. My lawyers say we can have it dismissed within weeks, maybe days." His jaw tightened just slightly, the only sign of the fury he was holding down. "He's not doing this because he believes it. He's doing it to force you to engage with him, to pull you back into his orbit. It's a tantrum, Claire. A very expensive, very cruel tantrum." And here is where Michael's plan, which was already doomed, curdled into something that would destroy him completely. Because Claire did not cry. She did not panic. She sat very still for a long moment, and then a strange, cold clarity settled over her face, and she said something that made Alexander go quiet. "He wants to question paternity," she said slowly. "He wants to bring a child's origins into a courtroom. Michael of all people." She let out a breath that was almost a laugh, but had no humor in it at all. "He has no idea what he's doing. He has no idea what he's about to make me say out loud." "What do you mean?" Alexander asked, and Claire told him. She told him the thing she had never told anyone, the thing she had carried alone for years, the thing that had nearly broken her during her marriage, the secret grief that Michael had let her drown in, rather than admit the truth. "When Michael and I were married," Claire began, and her voice was steady, but her hand had tightened around Alexander's, "we tried to have a child for years. It was the one thing I wanted more than anything, and it never happened. Month after month, year after year. Nothing." Alexander was very still listening. "And every month it didn't happen, I broke a little more," Claire went on, "because I thought it was me. Everyone thought it was me. Michael thought it was me. He never said it outright, but I could see it in how he looked at me. Like I was defective, like I had failed at the one thing a wife was supposed to be able to do. I went to doctors, I ran every test, I took every treatment, I put my body through things I never talked about because I was so desperate to give him a child, to prove I wasn't broken." Her voice cracked just slightly on the word broken. "And the whole time," she said, "Michael refused to get tested. He said there was no point. He said men in his family were fertile going back generations. He made me feel like even asking him to see a doctor was an insult to his manhood. So I carried it alone. I let everyone believe it was my fault. I believed it was my fault. For years, Alexander. I hated my own body. I grieved children I couldn't have and blamed myself for every single one." She looked up at him, and there was something in her eyes now that was very old and very tired. "And then, after the divorce, when I was finally alone, I decided to find out the truth once and for all. For myself, not for him, just so I could stop hating myself." She paused. "I got my full medical records, all of them going back years, including tests I didn't even know had been run." Alexander waited. "There was a fertility panel," Claire said quietly, "from 8 years ago, Michael's. He did get tested, Alexander, once, early on. He got tested and the results came back and they showed a significant problem. On his side. Not mine. His. Her voice was barely above a whisper now. And he never told me. He got those results, he saw the truth, and he made a choice. He decided he would rather let me believe I was the broken one for the rest of our marriage than admit that the problem was him. He let me hate myself for years to protect his own image, and then when he was done with me, he told me I wasn't the woman he needed anymore, and he walked away, and he let me carry that lie out the door with me. The sunroom was silent. Alexander Sterling, a man who prided himself on his composure, on never showing his cards, sat there with a look on his face that Claire had never seen before. It was not surprise. It was a cold, still, absolute fury, the kind of anger that does not shout because it does not need to. He knew, Alexander said, not a question. He knew, Claire confirmed. For 8 years he knew. And then Alexander understood the full staggering irony of what Michael had done. Michael had filed a lawsuit questioning the paternity of Claire's child. Michael had chosen of all the weapons in the world to walk into a courtroom and make an issue of fertility of paternity, of who could and could not have children. Michael had picked the one fight that would force into the light the exact secret that would destroy him. He's handed us the sword to cut his own head off, Alexander said slowly. If he wants to litigate paternity, if he wants to open the question of fertility in a courtroom, then your medical records become relevant. His medical records become relevant. The moment he made this about who can father a child, he made his own 8-year-old fertility panel fair game. Claire nodded. He never thinks past his own anger. He never has. He's so busy trying to hurt me that he can't see he's about to expose himself. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Alexander did something that surprised her. He did not smile in triumph. He did not start planning his revenge. Instead, he reached up and gently wiped a tear from Claire's cheek, a tear she hadn't even realized had fallen. "You carried that for years," he said softly. "You let yourself believe you were broken, and it was never you. It was never ever you." And Claire, who had held that grief alone for so long, who had never once let herself weep about it in front of another human being, finally broke. Not with the wild sobbing of fresh pain, but with the deep shaking release of a wound that has been closed over something poisonous for far too long, finally opening to let the poison out. Alexander held her. He did not rush her. He held her the way Michael never had, the way a man holds someone whose pain matters more to him than his own comfort. "I'm sorry," Claire whispered. "I don't know why I'm crying. It was so long ago." "You're crying," Alexander said, "because you finally have someone safe to cry in front of. That's all. That's the only reason." Meanwhile, across the city, Michael was feeling for the first time in days something that resembled satisfaction. He had done something. He had taken action. The passive helplessness of watching his company bleed had been replaced by the intoxicating feeling of being on the offensive. In his mind, the lawsuit was already working. Claire would have to respond. Sterling would have to deal with him. He would be once again a force they had to reckon with rather than a footnote they could dismiss. He allowed himself to imagine it. Claire forced to sit across a table from him. Claire having to acknowledge him, engage with him, see him. Maybe he thought in the fantasy that only a man that deluded could construct. Maybe once they were in the same room again, once she saw how much he still cared enough to fight some old feeling would stir. Maybe she would remember. "I still have moves," Michael told James on the phone that evening, and there was a brightness in his voice that had been missing for days. "I'm not finished. People think I'm finished. I'm not." "Michael," James said, and there was something in his voice, something cautious. "What did you do?" "I made sure I'm not so easy to ignore," Michael said. "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer you're getting. Just keep the investors calm. I'm handling the rest." But James, who had known Michael for 11 years, heard the manic edge in his boss's voice and felt a chill. He had seen Michael make bad decisions before, but he had never heard him sound like this cornered, this reckless, this convinced of his own righteousness while standing at the edge of a cliff. "Whatever you did," James said quietly, "I hope you thought it through." Michael had not thought it through. Michael had not thought anything through in years. That was the whole problem. 3 days later, the response came. It did not come as a phone call. It did not come as a threat. It came as a legal filing delivered to Richard Kane's office, and Richard read it, and then Richard called Michael, and his voice was the voice of a man who has just watched a car accident in slow motion and could do nothing to stop it. "Michael," he said, "we need to withdraw, right now, today, before this goes any further. Why is she settling? Is she agreeing to meet?" "No, Michael, she's not settling. She's burying you." Richard's voice was tight. Their response doesn't just ask to dismiss your petition, it welcomes it. They want the paternity question fully litigated. They're demanding full medical discovery, both parties, all records, and Michael. He paused. They specifically cite the relevance of historical fertility testing, both parties' historical fertility testing. Michael's blood went cold. "They know," Richard said. "I don't know what they know or how, but the way this is written, they know something about your medical history, and they are inviting, no, they are begging for it to come into the record. Michael, is there something in your medical history you didn't tell me?" Michael sat down very slowly. The fertility panel. 8 years ago. The results he had buried, had hidden, even from Claire, had told himself he would deal with later, and then had simply never dealt with, had let become the invisible cornerstone of a lie that ruined his wife's sense of herself. He had forgotten about it. That was the truly astonishing thing. He had buried the truth so deep for so long that he had genuinely managed to forget it existed. He had walked into a courtroom battle about paternity without once remembering that he was the last man on earth who should ever raise the question of fertility. And Claire had remembered. Claire had never forgotten. Claire had carried the truth of it in her body and her heart for years, and Michael had just with his own hands dragged it into the light. "Michael," Richard said, "talk to me. What's in your records?" "Withdraw the petition," Michael said. His voice was barely audible. "It may be too late for that to matter. Once they've responded with a discovery demand, the court may—" "Withdraw it!" Michael shouted, and his voice cracked in the middle, and for the first time Richard heard not the arrogant, cold client he was used to, but a terrified man watching his last lie collapse. "Do whatever you have to do. Pay whatever you have to pay. Make it go away. Please." The please was what told Richard how bad it was. Michael Whitmore did not say please. "I'll try," Richard said. "But Michael, if the answer to my question is what I think it is, then you didn't just make a legal mistake. You built your entire divorce, maybe your entire marriage, on a lie that's now going to come out. And there is nothing I can do about the fact that she knows, that she has always known. You can't withdraw that." Michael hung up the phone. He sat alone in his office, in the beautiful office that would not be his much longer, and the full weight of what he had done finally came down on him, and it was heavier than anything he had ever carried. He had not just failed Claire by leaving her, that he had told himself was a normal human failing. People fell out of love. People made mistakes. But this was different. This was a wound he had inflicted with full knowledge over years deliberately. He had watched his wife blame herself for their childlessness. He had watched her cry in bathrooms. He had watched her flinch every time a friend announced a pregnancy. He had watched her body break under treatments she didn't need for a problem she didn't have. And he had held the truth in his hands the whole time, and he had chosen his own vanity over her sanity day after day, month after month, year after year. He had let the woman who sold her mother's ring to save him believe she was broken, because admitting he was the broken one was more than his pride could survive. For the first time, Michael did not reach for denial. It was not there to grab. The truth was too big now, too clear, too undeniable. It filled the whole room. He thought of Claire's face across the restaurant, that deep, unshakable peace. And he understood now that part of that peace, maybe the deepest part of it, came from the fact that she had finally learned the truth. She had finally stopped hating her own body. She had finally been set free from a lie he had chained her to for a decade. And she was pregnant now. She was going to have the child she had always wanted, with a man who deserved her. And the child was living proof, the final and absolute proof that Claire had never been the broken one at all. Michael put his face in his hands. Somewhere in the building, his phone was ringing again. It was probably James. It was probably news of another investor pulling out another crack in the collapsing structure of Whitmore Global. The company was dying, and Michael found to his own surprise that he could barely bring himself to care about it anymore, because he was beginning to understand that the company had never been the thing of real value in his life. The ring had been. The wife had been. The years of quiet loyalty had been. The person who told him do it when the whole world said he was crazy. That had been the treasure, the actual treasure, and he had spent it like it was nothing and traded it for a corner office and a young girlfriend and a name in a magazine that no one would remember in a year. His phone buzzed with a text. He almost didn't look, but he did. It was from an unknown number, and it said only this: withdraw the lawsuit and never contact her again, and the records stay sealed. Continue, and everything comes out. Publicly. Everything. Your choice. This is the only mercy you will be offered. It was not signed. It did not need to be. Michael read it 3 times. Mercy. Alexander Sterling was offering him mercy. The same man who had told him, "I don't care enough about you to want to hurt you," was now offering to bury the worst truth of Michael's life, to protect Michael's reputation, not out of kindness to Michael, but out of a desire to protect Claire from the ugliness of a public fight. And Michael realized with a fresh wave of shame that even in this, even in his own destruction, he was not the point. Alexander was not protecting Michael. Alexander was protecting Claire. Michael's dignity was being preserved only as a side effect of a good man shielding the woman he loved. Michael typed back one word with a hand that shook: withdrawn. He set the phone down. And then Michael Whitmore, 52 years old, founder of a dying empire, a man who had once toasted himself in the most expensive restaurant in New York and laughed about the wife he threw away, put his head down on his expensive desk in his expensive office, and for the first time since he was a child, he wept. Not for the company, not for the money, not for the name in the magazines. He wept for Claire. He wept for the ring he never bought back, for the years she cried alone believing a lie he had authored, for the woman who had loved him when he had nothing, whom he had discarded when he had everything. He wept because he finally fully understood what he had done, and understanding it was a kind of agony he had spent 3 years running from, and now there was nowhere left to run. The lawsuit was withdrawn quietly the next morning. It never made the papers. Alexander Sterling kept his word, and the records stayed sealed, and the world never learned the truth of why Whitmore Global's founder had briefly and bizarrely tried to sue his pregnant ex-wife. But something had changed in Michael. The lie was gone. The denial was gone. And in their place for the first time in his adult life was the unbearable, clarifying weight of the truth. He had lost the deal. He was losing the company. He had lost Claire long ago. He had lost the mistress the moment the money got shaky. He had lost the respect of a board that had never really respected him. He had lost, it seemed, everything. But the thing he had truly lost, the thing whose absence he was only now beginning to feel, was the man he might have been. The man Claire had believed in at that kitchen table with the cracked linoleum all those years ago. The man who was worth selling a ring for. That man had died somewhere along the way, smothered under money and vanity and pride. And Michael sat in the ruins of everything he had built, and he wondered for the first time whether it was possible to bring that man back to life. He did not know the answer. He only knew that this version of himself he had spent decades protecting, the powerful, untouchable, admired Michael Whitmore, was gone now and was never coming back. And standing in the empty space where that man used to be, Michael felt something he had not felt in longer than he could remember. He felt honest. It was the most painful thing he had ever felt. And though he could not have known it yet, it was the only thing that could save him. But honesty. Michael was about to learn does not arrive all at once and then leave you in peace. It comes in waves. And the next wave came at 10 o'clock that same morning when James Coleman walked into his office without knocking, which James had never once done in 11 years. "You need to see this," James said, and set a tablet down on the desk in front of Michael. It was a financial news site, and the headline at the top in bold letters read, "Whitmore Global in freefall as major partner exits investors flee." Michael read it slowly. The article was brutal, and it was accurate, which was worse. It laid out everything: the collapsed Sterling partnership, the nervous investors, the board's loss of confidence, and then near the bottom a line that made Michael's stomach turn to stone. Sources close to the situation suggest the collapse may be tied to personal matters involving Whitmore's founder and a rival executive. They don't have the details, James said quietly. Not yet, but someone talked. Someone always talks. And once one reporter smells blood, they all come. Michael looked up at him. How bad is it? James did not soften it. He had softened things for Michael for 11 years, and he was done. 3 investors pulled out this morning. 2 more are on the phone right now with their lawyers. The stock, what there is of it, is in free fall. Our credit line is being reviewed, which is a polite way of saying it's about to be pulled. Michael, I've been doing this a long time. I've seen companies survive worse than this, but not with a leader the market has stopped believing in. And they've stopped believing in you. The words should have destroyed Michael. A week ago, they would have. A week ago, his entire sense of self was welded to those numbers, to that name, to the belief that he was a great man because he had built a great company. But something had shifted in him in the ruins of the night before, and Michael heard the news of his empire's death with a strange, hollow calm. "Sit down, James," he said. James hesitated, then sat. "How long have you known?" Michael asked. "That I was like this, that I was the kind of man who would do the things I've done. You've been with me 11 years. You knew me before the money got out of hand. When did I become someone you couldn't stand?" James was quiet for a long moment. He was not a man who lied easily, and Michael could see him deciding whether to be kind or honest, and he watched James choose honest the way Richard had, the way everyone was choosing now, as if the collapse of Michael's power had given them all permission to finally tell him the truth. "About 5 years ago," James said. "There was a Christmas party, Claire was still around, and you introduced her to a group of investors, and one of them made some comment, I don't even remember what, something dismissive about her. And instead of defending her, you laughed. You laughed along with them, Michael. And I watched Claire's face, and I watched you not even notice you'd hurt her, and I thought, there he goes. The man I signed on with is gone." James paused. "I stayed because you paid me well and because I have a family. I'm not proud of that, but you asked, so there it is. Michael absorbed this. He remembered that party. He did not remember the comment or Claire's face or laughing. That was the horror of it. The moment that had told James everything about who Michael had become was a moment Michael himself had been too self-absorbed to even register. "How many moments like that were there?" Michael asked quietly, "that I never noticed?" "Hundreds," James said. "Thousands, maybe. That's how it works, Michael. You don't become cruel all at once. You become cruel one moment at a time, and you never notice a single one of them because each one is too small to see. And then one day you look up, and you're a man who sues his pregnant ex-wife and calls it strategy." The words landed like the slap, but Michael did not flinch from them. He had spent his whole life flinching from hard truths, deflecting them, denying them. He made himself sit in this one. "You know about the lawsuit," he said. "Everyone in the building knows about the lawsuit," James said. "Richard's paralegal talked. That's how these things go. And I'll tell you something, Michael, as a man who's about to lose his job when this company folds. That lawsuit is the most shameful thing I've ever seen a person do, and I've seen a lot." He stood up. "I don't know what you found out that made you withdraw it so fast, but whatever it was, I hope it woke you up, because there's nothing left to lose now. The company's gone. The only thing you've got left to save is whatever's left of your soul." And with that, James Coleman walked out of the office, and Michael understood that he had just heard the truth from the last honest man in the building, and that the man was right about all of it. The days that followed were the slow, grinding death of everything Michael had built. The board met again, and this time they did not ask questions because they already had their answers. They voted with a coldness that Michael found he could not even blame them for, to begin the process of selling the company's assets and winding down operations. Harold Grant, who had warned him, "We will not go down with you," delivered the verdict personally. "It's over, Michael," Harold said. "The market won't have you. No partner will touch us while you're at the helm, and there's no time to bring in someone new. The company you built is going to be sold for parts. I'm sorry. I truly am. You had something real once. I don't know what happened to you." "I do," Michael said quietly. It surprised Harold. "I do know what happened to me. I stopped being worth believing in, and it took losing everything to finally see it." Harold studied him for a long moment, and something in his hard old face softened just slightly. "That's the first true thing I've heard you say in years," he said, and then he left. The mistress, Olivia, did not even bother with a phone call. Michael learned she was gone the way he learned everything now secondhand diminished. A mutual acquaintance mentioned casually that Olivia had been seen at a gala on the arm of a hedge fund manager, a younger man richer than Michael had ever been. She had already moved on to the next good view. Michael found he felt nothing about it at all. She had never been real. She had been a symptom, a thing he had reached for to fill a hole that no amount of admiration could ever fill. He did not miss her. He was not sure he had ever known her. But the strange thing, the thing Michael had not expected, was that as the walls came down, as the money drained away, and the people scattered, and the name that had once opened every door began to close them. Instead, Michael did not feel the terror he had always imagined he would feel. He felt lighter. It made no sense. He was losing everything. And yet with each thing that fell away, some crushing weight he had not even known he was carrying fell away with it. The weight of pretending, the weight of maintaining an image, the weight of being Michael Whitmore, the great man, the untouchable man, a performance he had been trapped inside for so long that he had forgotten it was a performance at all. One evening near the end, Michael found himself standing in his apartment, holding a photograph he had not looked at in years. He had found it in a drawer while packing because the apartment was being sold too, along with everything else. It was a photo of him and Claire from the very early days, before the company, before the money. They were standing in front of that first tiny office, the one the size of a closet, and they were both laughing at something, and Claire had her arm around him. And Michael was looking at the camera with an expression he barely recognized on his own face. He was happy, truly happy. Not the performed satisfaction of the restaurant, not the hollow glow of being admired. He was happy in the way a person is happy when they have nothing but the one thing that matters, and they know it. Michael sat down on the floor of his emptying apartment, holding the photograph, and he stayed there for a long time. He thought about the man in that photo, that young, hungry, hopeful man who had a wife who believed in him, and a dream and nothing else. That man would have been horrified by what Michael had become. That man had loved Claire, had genuinely loved her before the loving her became inconvenient to the myth he was building. Where had that man gone? Michael did not have an answer. But sitting there on the floor, surrounded by the packed-up remains of a life that had looked perfect and had been empty, Michael made a decision. Not a strategic one, not a calculated one. For the first time in 20 years, Michael made a decision that had nothing to do with winning. He decided he wanted to find that man again. He did not know if it was possible. He did not know if a person could travel that far down the wrong road and still find his way back. But he knew he could not keep being who he had been. That man was dead killed by his own vanity, and Michael found that he was not sorry to see him go. The next morning, Michael did something he had not done in 3 years. He sat down and he took out a pen and a piece of paper because some things should not be typed, and he began to write a letter to Claire. He did not write it to win her back. He knew finally that she was gone, that she had been gone for years, that she belonged now to a life and a man and a child that had nothing to do with him. He did not write it to explain himself or to make excuses or to soften the truth. He wrote it to tell the truth, the whole truth, about the ring he never bought back, about the fertility results he had hidden, about the years he had let her blame herself, about the man he had become and the man he had failed to be. He wrote, "I let you believe you were broken, and you were never broken. I was, I have always been, and I am more sorry than any words can hold." He did not know if he would ever send it. He did not know if she would ever read it. He did not even know if he had the right to ask for her attention one more time after everything. But he wrote it. And in the writing of it, something in Michael that had been frozen for a very long time began at last to thaw. He did not know that Claire across the city was about to give birth to a son. He did not know that Alexander Sterling, the man who had every reason to despise him, would one day play a role in Michael's return to something like grace. He did not know that the hardest part of his reckoning was still ahead of him, or that the road back to being a person worth believing in was longer and steeper than he could yet imagine. He knew only that he had finally stopped lying. And in a life built entirely on lies, that single, painful, honest act was the first stone of a foundation for something new. Something Michael Whitmore had never once in 52 years bothered to build. A real self. He folded the letter and he set it in the drawer where the photograph had been, and he sat in the quiet of his empty apartment. A man who had lost everything he had ever wanted, and had, without knowing it, yet just begun to find the only thing that had ever mattered. The letter stayed in the drawer for 11 days. Michael took it out every morning and read it, and every morning he put it back, because he could not decide whether sending it was an act of courage or just the final selfishness of a man who wanted to unburden himself onto a woman who owed him nothing. He had spent his whole life taking from Claire. Even now, even in his remorse, he could not be sure the letter was for her and not for him. On the 12th day, the decision was taken out of his hands. His phone rang and the number was unknown, and Michael almost didn't answer because unknown numbers lately meant reporters or creditors or lawyers. But something made him pick up. "Michael Whitmore," a woman's voice said. Crisp, professional. "Yes. Please hold for Mr. Sterling." Michael's heart stopped. He stood very still in his half-empty apartment, the phone pressed to his ear, and he waited. And then a familiar voice came on the line, the same voice that had told him weeks ago, "I don't care enough about you to want to hurt you." "Michael," Alexander Sterling said. "Alexander." Michael's mouth had gone dry. "I did what you asked. The lawsuit's withdrawn. I haven't contacted her. I've kept my word." "I know you have," Alexander said. "That's not why I'm calling." There was a pause, and in that pause, Michael's mind raced through a dozen terrible possibilities. Had something happened? Had the records leaked anyway? Was Alexander calling to deliver some final blow? "Claire had the baby," Alexander said. 3 days ago. A son. They're both healthy." Michael closed his eyes. Something moved through him that he had no name for, some tangle of grief and joy and loss, all knotted together. Claire had her son. The child she had wanted for so long, the child she had believed for years she could never have, was here. "That's—" Michael started, and his voice broke. He tried again. "That's wonderful. I'm happy for her. For you both. Truly." "I believe you," Alexander said, and he sounded almost surprised to hear himself say it. "That's part of why I'm calling. Something's changed in your voice, Michael. From the man I spoke to a month ago. I've made a career out of reading people, and I'm rarely wrong. So I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want a direct answer. What happened to you?" Michael sat down on a packing box, the only thing left to sit on in the room. "I lost everything," he said simply. "The company's being sold for parts, the money's gone, the people are gone, and I finally ran out of lies to tell myself." He let out a shaking breath. "It turns out I was never the man I pretended to be. I was just a coward with a good balance sheet. And when the balance sheet went, there was nothing underneath it, nothing at all. I had to build a person from scratch at 52 years old, Alexander, because I'd never bothered to build one the first time." There was a long silence on the line. "Claire found a letter," Alexander said finally. Michael's head came up. "What? You didn't send it, but you wrote it. And a few days ago, when I was helping pack up some things from the storage unit your assets went into, one of the movers found a photograph, and behind it, folded up, was a letter addressed to Claire, in your handwriting." Alexander paused. "I didn't read it. I want to be clear about that. I recognized her name and I stopped, but I brought it to her. I don't keep things from her, Michael. I never will. That's the difference between us." Michael's mind reeled. The letter, the drawer. The apartment had been cleared while he was out one afternoon, the last of his belongings hauled off to a storage unit he could barely afford, and the letter must have gone with it, still tucked behind the photograph where he had left it. "She read it," Michael said. It was not a question. "She read it," Alexander confirmed. "All of it. Twice." Another pause. "It's why I'm calling. She wants to see you." The floor seemed to tilt beneath Michael. "She wants to see me. Against my advice, I'll be honest with you. I told her she owes you nothing. I told her that a man who does what you did doesn't get the gift of her forgiveness just because he finally figured out how to feel bad about it." Alexander's voice hardened just slightly. "But Claire is a better person than I am. She always has been. That's one of about 1,000 reasons I love her. and she said there was something in that letter she needed to respond to in person. So, tomorrow, 2 o'clock. I'll text you the address. And Michael. The warning was quiet but absolute. If you hurt her again in any way with a single word, there is no corner of this earth I won't follow you to. Do you understand me? I understand, Michael said. I would never, not again, I promise you. Your promises don't mean much, Alexander said, but we'll see if you've learned to keep them. The line went dead. Michael sat on the packing box in his empty apartment for a long time, holding the silent phone, and he was more terrified than he had been through the entire collapse of his company. Losing his empire had frightened him less than the thought of standing in front of Claire and having nothing to hide behind. No money, no title, no performance. Just the naked truth of who he was offered up to the one person on earth who knew exactly how far he had fallen from who he should have been. He did not sleep that night either. But it was a different kind of sleeplessness than the night in the restaurant. That night, he had lain awake defending himself against the truth. This night, he lay awake, preparing to finally surrender to it. At 2 o'clock the next afternoon, Michael stood outside a townhouse on a quiet, tree-lined street, and he almost turned around 3 times before he made himself knock. Claire opened the door herself. She looked tired in the way new mothers look tired, but underneath the tiredness was the same deep peace Michael had seen in the restaurant, and now he understood where it came from. It came from being free. Free of him, free of the lie he had chained her to, free to become exactly who she had always been meant to be. "Michael," she said, "come in." He stepped inside. The house was warm and lived in, and real, the opposite of every showpiece apartment Michael had ever owned. She led him to a small sitting room, and there in a bassinet near the window was a sleeping infant, and Michael's breath caught in his throat. "That's him," Claire said softly. "That's my son, Daniel." Michael looked at the child, and something cracked open in his chest. This was the child Claire had wanted for a decade. This was the child she had believed she could never have, because Michael had let her believe it. And here he was, small and perfect and impossibly alive, sleeping in a patch of afternoon light, in a home built by a man who had never once made Claire feel like she was anything less than a miracle. "He's beautiful," Michael managed. "Claire, he's beautiful." "He is," she agreed. She gestured for Michael to sit, and she sat across from him, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "I read your letter," Claire said finally. "I never meant to send it," Michael said quickly. "I want you to know that. I wrote it for myself, I think, as much as for you, and that was wrong. That was one more selfish thing in a lifetime of them, and I'm sorry it reached you at all. You have every right to—" "Michael," Claire said gently, "stop, let me talk." He fell silent. Claire was quiet for a moment, gathering herself, and when she spoke, her voice was steady, but Michael could hear the years of pain buried underneath the steadiness. "For 8 years, she said, I thought I was broken. Do you understand what that did to me? Every month when it didn't happen, I died a little. I looked at other women with their children and I hated myself. I lay awake at night doing math, counting the years, feeling my body fail me over and over. I begged doctors to find what was wrong with me. I put myself through treatments that made me sick, that made me feel like a lab animal, and every single time I told myself it's worth it. If I can just give him a child, because I loved you, Michael. God help me, I loved you, and I thought the only thing missing from our life was a baby, and I thought it was my fault we didn't have one." Michael could not speak. His throat had closed entirely. "And the whole time," Claire went on, and now her voice trembled, "you knew. You had the answer in a drawer. You knew it wasn't me. And you let me hate myself. You let me break myself. Year after year you watched me grieve and you chose your pride over my sanity every single day. Do you know what that is, Michael? That's not falling out of love. People fall out of love. That's cruelty. Sustained, deliberate cruelty dressed up as a man protecting his image." "I know," Michael whispered. "I know it is. There's no excuse. I've stopped even looking for one." "When I found the records after the divorce," Claire said, "I was in a parking lot outside the doctor's office. I sat in my car, and I read them, and when I understood what they meant, I couldn't breathe. 8 years of blaming myself, 8 years of hating my own body, and it was you, it was always you, and you'd known from the beginning." She wiped at her eyes. "I screamed Michael. Alone in that car, I screamed until my throat was raw. Not because I still wanted you. I didn't. I was already free of you by then. I screamed because of all those years I'd spent believing a lie you could have ended with 3 sentences. I am so sorry, Michael said, and the words felt useless, obscenely inadequate, but they were all he had. Claire, I have no defense. I did the most unforgivable thing a person can do to someone who loved them. I took your suffering, and I used it to protect my own vanity. And I would give anything, everything I have left, which is nothing, to take it back. But I can't. I know I can't. Claire looked at him for a long moment. No, she said. You can't. And then she said something that Michael had not expected, something that undid him completely. But here's the thing I needed to tell you in person, she said. The thing I couldn't put in a text or a letter. I forgive you. Michael stared at her. What? Not for you, Claire said quickly. Don't misunderstand me. This forgiveness isn't a gift I'm giving you. You haven't earned it, and I don't think you ever fully could. I'm forgiving you for me, because I carried that anger for years, and I'm done carrying it. I have a son now. I have a good man who loves me. I have a life so much bigger and warmer than anything I had with you, and I refuse to poison one single day of it by holding on to what you did. Hating you is a weight, Michael, and I'm setting it down, not because you deserve to be free of it, because I deserve to be free of it. Michael's eyes filled with tears. I don't know what to say. There's nothing to say, Claire said. That's what you never understood. You always thought there was something to say, some argument to win, some way to talk yourself back into the right. But some things you can't talk your way out of. You can only live differently going forward. That's the only apology that ever meant anything. Not words, a different life. She stood, and Michael understood that the conversation was ending, and that this was the last time that after today the door between them would close for good. Your letter said you're trying to become a different man, Claire said. So become one, not for me, not to win me back, because that's over. It's been over for years, and part of you needs to finally accept that. Become a different man, because the world has enough of the man you were. Go be worth something, not worth money, worth something. Michael stood too on unsteady legs. Can I ask you one thing? He said. Claire waited. The ring, Michael said. Your mother's ring. The one you sold to save the company. I never bought it back. I told myself I would, and I never did, and I've thought about it every day since I lost everything. Is there any way at all that I could— No, Claire said, but not unkindly. It's gone, Michael. It's been gone for 12 years. You can't buy it back. You can't fix it. That's the whole lesson if you're finally ready to learn it. Some things don't come back. You spend them, and they're gone, and all you can do is stop being the kind of person who spends them. She paused. But I appreciate that you finally remembered it existed. That's more than I expected from you. That's something. She walked him to the door, and there on the threshold, Michael stopped and looked back one last time at the sitting room at the bassinet, at the sleeping child, who would grow up never knowing Michael's name in a home full of a love Michael had never once managed to build. He's lucky, Michael said quietly. Daniel, he's lucky to have you, and to have a father who deserves you. Yes, Claire said. He is. And there was no cruelty in the way she said it. Just truth. Simple, clean, undeniable truth. Michael stepped out onto the porch. And then, because he could not help it, because there was one more thing he had to know, he turned back. Were you ever happy? He asked. With me. In the beginning. Before I ruined it. Was any of it real? Claire considered the question honestly, the way she considered everything. Yes, she said. In the beginning it was real. When we had nothing. When we were building it together. When you still looked at me like I mattered. Her expression softened, just for a moment, remembering. That's the tragedy of it, Michael. It wasn't that we never had anything. It's that we had everything, and you threw it away, chasing things that were worth so much less. I mourned that. For a long time, I mourned the man you were in the beginning, but I've stopped now, because I finally understand something. What? That man wasn't real either, Claire said gently. He was just you before you had enough money to become who you really were. The cruelty was always in there. The money just gave it room to grow. And I think if you're honest with yourself, that's the hardest truth of all. It wasn't the money that changed you. The money just revealed you. The words hit Michael harder than anything Alexander had said, harder than the collapse of his company, harder than any of it. Because he knew the moment she said it, that it was true. He had spent weeks telling himself that money had corrupted him, that success had twisted him, that he had been a good man once. It was a comforting story. It made him a victim of his own fortune rather than the author of his own cruelty. But Claire had just taken that last comfort away. The money didn't change you. It revealed you. Then how? Michael said, and his voice was barely a whisper. How do I become someone different if it was always in me? If that's who I really am, how do I become someone new? And Claire gave him the answer that would guide the rest of his life, the answer he would think about every day for the years that followed. You don't become someone new by discovering you were good all along, she said. That's a lie people tell themselves. You become someone new by admitting you were bad and then choosing every single day over and over for the rest of your life to act against it. It never gets easy. It never becomes who you naturally are. Every good thing you do from now on, you'll have to fight for it against the man you actually are. And you'll have to do it anyway, forever, with no reward, just because it's right. She looked at him steadily. That's what redemption actually is, Michael. It's not a transformation. It's a war, and most people aren't willing to fight it. They'd rather stay comfortable and call themselves good. So the only question that matters now is whether you're willing to fight a war you'll never fully win. Michael looked at her. This woman he had thrown away. This woman who was wiser and stronger and better than he had ever let himself see, and he understood that she had just given him something far more valuable than forgiveness. She had given him the truth about how to live. I'm willing, he said. I don't know if I'll succeed, but I'm willing to fight it every day, I swear to you. Don't swear to me, Claire said. I'm not part of this. Swear to yourself, and then keep it in 1,000 small moments nobody will ever see. That's where it counts. Not in the grand gestures, in the small ones. The ones I used to watch you fail year after year when you thought no one was looking. She stepped back into the doorway. Goodbye, Michael, she said. I hope you become someone your son would have been proud of. The son we never had. The one you made me believe was my fault. And then gently, without anger, without cruelty, with nothing but the clean finality of a person closing a door on a chapter that had cost her too much, Claire shut the door. Michael stood on the porch for a long time. He did not cry. He had done his crying. What he felt now was something quieter and more permanent, a kind of solemn clarity, the feeling of a man who has finally been told exactly who he is and exactly what it will cost to become something better. He walked down the steps and out onto the tree-lined street, a man with no company, no fortune, no reputation, no wife, no home, nothing at all except the hardest and most valuable thing he had ever been given. The truth about himself. And a choice stretching out in front of him for the rest of his life to be made and remade every single day. Fight the war or stay comfortable and call himself good. Michael Whitmore, 52 years old, walked to the end of the street, and at the corner he stopped, and he took out his phone and he did the first small thing. The first of the 1,000 small things nobody would ever see. He called James Coleman, the man who had told him the truth when everyone else was still lying, and when James answered warily, Michael said the words he had never once said to an employee in 30 years of business. James, I owe you an apology, a real one, and I owe you a reference, the best one I've ever written, to help you land somewhere that deserves you. Can I buy you lunch? Not to ask you for anything, just to say I'm sorry and to say thank you for 11 years, and for telling me the truth when I didn't deserve it. There was a long, stunned silence on the line. Who is this? James said finally. And what have you done with Michael Whitmore? And Michael, standing on a street corner with nothing left in the world, laughed. A real laugh. The first real laugh in longer than he could remember. That's a very good question, he said. I'm working on the answer, one day at a time. It was the beginning. Not of a comeback. Not of a redemption arc with a tidy ending. It was the beginning of a war. The long and unglamorous war Claire had described the war Michael would fight in silence in small moments for the rest of his life, with no audience and no applause and no guarantee he would ever win. But he had started. And for a man who had spent 52 years never once fighting for anything that didn't benefit him, starting was everything. The lunch with James happened 2 days later in a small diner that Michael would never once have set foot in during the years of his wealth. James arrived, skeptical, guarded, sitting across from Michael with his arms crossed and his eyes narrowed clearly, waiting for the catch because in all his years with Michael, there had always been a catch. Michael did not have one. He simply ordered a coffee, and he looked James in the eye, and he apologized. Not the corporate apology, the one that was really a defense in disguise. A real one. He named the specific things he had done. The Christmas party. The years of taking credit for James's work. The times he had made James stay late for no reason other than to prove he could. The bonus he had promised and quietly clawed back 3 years ago, thinking James wouldn't notice, though. Of course, James had noticed, because people always notice. "I noticed," James confirmed quietly. "My wife cried that Christmas. We'd been counting on it." "I know," Michael said. "I didn't know then. I made it a point not to know. But I know now, and I'm sorry, and I want to make it right. I don't have much left, but I have enough to pay you what I stole from you. It'll be the last thing I do before the accounts close." James stared at him for a long moment. "You're serious," he said. "I'm serious." And something in James's face shifted, some armor he had worn around Michael for years, finally coming loose, and he uncrossed his arms and he let out a long breath. "You know what the strangest part of all this is?" James said. "I always thought if you ever fell, I'd be glad. I used to lie awake some nights imagining it. Your whole empire coming down and me standing there watching, finally free of you." He shook his head slowly. "And now here you are actually fallen, and I'm not glad at all. I just feel sad. Sad for all the years you wasted. Sad for the man you could have been. You had it all, Michael. And you were miserable the whole time. Weren't you even at the top?" Michael considered the question honestly. "Yes," he said. "I was miserable the whole time. I just didn't have the vocabulary for it. I called it hunger. I called it ambition. I called it drive. But it was just misery wearing nicer clothes. I was starving to death in a room full of food, and I kept thinking if I just ate a little more, I'd finally feel full. And I never did. Not once. Not for a single day." "And now," James asked, "you've got nothing now. Are you fuller with nothing than you were with everything?" Michael thought about Claire's face in the doorway, about the sleeping child, about the war she had described. "I don't know yet," he said. "I think I might be." Which is either the most pathetic thing I've ever said or the first true thing. I honestly can't tell which. James laughed despite himself. "Maybe both." "Maybe both," Michael agreed. They talked for 2 hours, and by the end of it, something had healed, not fully, because some things don't heal fully, but enough. When they parted, James shook Michael's hand, and it was not the cold, indifferent handshake Alexander Sterling had given him in the restaurant. It was the handshake of a man who had decided to believe cautiously that a person might actually be capable of change. "Send me that reference," James said. "And Michael, for what it's worth. I hope it works out. The becoming someone new thing, I really do." It was, Michael thought, watching James walk away, one of the great mercies of his life, that the first person he had wronged was also the first person willing to believe he might do better. He did not deserve it. But Claire had taught him that redemption was not about deserving. It was about the fight and the small moments and doing the right thing over and over with no reward. So he took the mercy and he vowed to be worthy of it. And he went home to the tiny apartment he had rented on the far edge of the city, the kind of apartment he had left Claire believing she would end up in. And he sat down to write the reference letter for James, and he made it the best thing he had ever written. The weeks that followed were the strangest of Michael's life. The company finished dying. The last of the assets were sold. The name Whitmore Global, which had once appeared in magazines and moved millions of dollars, quietly vanished from the world, absorbed into a larger firm, its logo taken down from the building where Michael had once ruled. Michael attended the final board meeting, not because he had any power left, but because he felt he owed it to the thing he had built and destroyed to be present at its end. Harold Grant found him afterward in the emptying lobby. "What will you do now?" Harold asked. Not unkindly. There was almost a gentleness in the old man's voice, the gentleness reserved for the truly fallen. "I don't know," Michael admitted. "Find work, I suppose. Real work. I haven't done real work in 20 years. I've done deals, I've done strategy. But actual work, the kind where you make something or help someone, I've forgotten how to do that, if I ever knew." Harold studied him. "You know," he said, "when I first invested in you all those years ago, I did it because of your wife." Michael went still. "What?" "Claire," Harold said. "I met her at a dinner before I put in a dime, and I watched the two of you together, and I watched how she talked about your idea, how she believed in it, how sharp she was about the business side, sharper than you, honestly, though. I don't think you ever noticed. And I thought any man with a partner like that is worth betting on. It wasn't you I invested in, Michael. Not really. It was the two of you, the team." He paused. "I watched the team fall apart over the years, watched her disappear from your life. And you know what? The company started dying the day she left. It took 3 years to show up in the numbers, but that was the day. I've thought about that a lot this past month. You didn't lose your company when Sterling pulled the deal. You lost it the day you lost her. Everything after that was just the delay." Michael absorbed this in silence. It was one more truth in a season of hard truths, and this one landed with particular weight because it came from a man who had no reason to soften it. "I didn't know you knew her," Michael said quietly. "You didn't know a lot of things," Harold said. "That was always your problem. You were so busy being impressive that you never bothered to be aware." He put on his coat. "For what it's worth, Michael, I don't hate you. I've seen enough men rise and fall to know it's rarely as simple as good and bad. But I'll tell you this, if you're serious about becoming someone different, then the smartest thing you ever did in your life was marry that woman, and the stupidest thing you ever did was fail to become someone worthy of her. Don't make the same mistake twice. Not with her, she's gone, but with whatever comes next. Become worthy of it before you have it, not after you've lost it." And with that, Harold Grant walked out of the building and out of Michael's life, leaving Michael alone in the lobby of the empire he had built and destroyed, holding one more piece of wisdom he wished he had learned 20 years sooner. Michael took a job. It was a small thing, an ordinary thing, the kind of thing that would have been beneath the Michael Whitmore of a year ago. A mid-sized logistics firm needed someone with experience to help them restructure, and they could not afford anyone good. And Michael, whose reputation was in ruins, but whose knowledge was still real, offered to do it for a modest salary and no title. The owner, a wary man named Tom, who had heard all the stories, almost turned him down. "Why would a man like you want to work for a company like mine?" Tom asked. "Because a company like yours is exactly the kind of place I spent my whole career looking down on," Michael said honestly. "And I've come to understand that the people I looked down on were worth more than the people I looked up to. I'd like to be useful, Mr. Tom. I've spent 20 years being impressive, and it made me a monster. I'd like to try being useful and see if it makes me a person." Tom hired him, partly out of curiosity, partly because he needed the help, and partly, he admitted later, because there was something in Michael's eyes that he had seen before in men who had hit the bottom and were genuinely trying to climb back up as someone different than they went down. The work was humbling in ways Michael had not expected. He was not the boss. He answered to Tom, who was 15 years younger than him and had a fraction of his experience but a great deal more decency. He worked alongside people who made in a year what Michael used to spend on a weekend, and he learned their names, all of them, and their children's names and the small daily struggles of their lives, and he found to his astonishment that he liked them, that he liked being among them, that the warmth of ordinary people, the very warmth he had spent his life fleeing in his pursuit of the glittering and the important, was the thing he had been starving for all along. There was a woman at the firm named Rosa who ran the front desk and who had been openly hostile to Michael when he arrived because she had read about him and knew exactly what kind of man he had been. For weeks she barely spoke to him, and Michael did not try to charm her because charm was the old way the manipulation dressed up as warmth. Instead, he simply did his work and treated her with respect. And one day when her car broke down and she had no way to get her kids from school, Michael, who now drove a 15-year-old sedan, quietly offered to pick them up. "Why?" Rosa asked suspiciously. "What do you want?" "Nothing," Michael said. Your kids need to get home. I have a car. That's the whole thing." It was not the whole thing, of course. It was one small stone in the foundation Claire had told him to build. One of the 1,000 small moments nobody would ever see. And Rosa saw it, and something in her thawed just slightly. And over the following months, as Michael kept showing up, kept doing the small, unglamorous right things, kept being useful instead of impressive, the hostility of his co-workers slowly turned into something like acceptance, and then eventually into something like respect. Not the respect he had spent his life chasing, the respect of powerful people in expensive rooms, a different kind, the respect of ordinary people who had watched him day after day and decided he was all right. It was worth more than every magazine cover he had ever appeared on. He never contacted Claire. That was part of the discipline part of the war. He had promised Alexander, and more importantly, he understood now that his redemption could have nothing to do with her, could not be aimed at winning her back, or earning her attention, or performing his growth for her approval. It had to be for its own sake, or it was worth nothing. So he stayed away. He built his new small life in silence, and he did not tell anyone about it, and he asked for nothing. But he thought about her every day. And every day when he faced some small choice, some tiny fork between the old cruelty and the new kindness, he heard her voice. Every good thing you do from now on, you'll have to fight for it against the man you actually are, and you'll have to do it anyway, forever, with no reward, just because it's right. Some days he lost the fight. He would catch himself being sharp with someone dismissive, arrogant, the old Michael surfacing like a drowned thing rising to the top of a lake. And in those moments, the difference was not that he never failed. The difference was that now he noticed. Now he saw the cruelty in the moment it happened, and he stopped, and he apologized, and he did better the next time. That was the whole of it. That was redemption, as Claire had described it. Not never falling. Falling and getting up and falling and getting up forever and calling the getting up a life. Months passed. Then the better part of a year. And then on an ordinary Tuesday, Michael received a phone call that he had not expected, that he could never have expected, that would open a door he had thought was closed forever. It was Alexander Sterling. "Michael," Alexander said, "I've been keeping an eye on you." Michael's heart clenched. "Have you?" "I have. I make it a point to know things you'll remember, and what I've come to know about the last year of your life is not what I expected to find." There was something new in Alexander's voice, something Michael had never heard from him before. It was impossibly respect. "You took a job at a logistics firm, you drive an old car, you pick up your co-workers' children from school, you've paid back money you owed people quietly asking for no credit. You've built a small, honest, unglamorous life, and you've done it entirely in private with no one watching, no press, no comeback story. And you've done it without contacting Claire once, which I know because I would know." Michael said nothing. His throat had gone tight. "I told her you couldn't change," Alexander said, "the day you came to the house. I told her that a man like you doesn't become a different person, that you'd feel bad for a while, and then find some new way to be who you always were. I was certain of it. I've read 1,000 people, and I'm rarely wrong." A pause. "I was wrong about you, Michael. It seems that a man actually can change if he loses enough and is honest enough and is willing to fight the war every single day with no reward. I didn't think it was possible. You've proven me wrong. And I'm not a man who enjoys being wrong, but in this case, I find that I'm glad to be." Michael gripped the phone. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Claire's firm is expanding," Alexander said. "Her consulting company, the one she built from nothing, the one that caught my attention in the first place. It's grown. She has clients all over the country now. And she needs people. Good people. People with real experience in restructuring struggling companies. People who understand the business side, but who've also, let's say, learned some humility along the way." A pause. "She doesn't know I'm making this call. This is my idea, not hers. But I've watched you for a year, and I think you might be exactly the kind of person her firm needs. And I think if you can keep being the man you've become, it might be good for you too." Michael could not speak. The offer was so far beyond anything he had imagined, so impossibly generous that he could not immediately understand it. "You'd let me work near her," he finally managed. "After everything." "Not near her," Alexander corrected. "For her. She'd be your boss, Michael. The woman you called simple, the woman you said had no ambition and no fire, the woman you threw away because you couldn't stand beside someone better than you. She would be your boss, and you would answer to her. And you would work every day to earn a place in the company she built with the same hands that once sold her mother's ring to save yours. There was steel in his voice, but underneath it, something almost like warmth. I can't think of a better test of whether you've really changed. Can you? Michael closed his eyes. He understood then that this was not a gift. It was a crucible. Alexander was offering him the one thing that could either complete his redemption or destroy it. The chance to stand beside Claire's greatness day after day in service of it, with no hope of reward, no possibility of romance, no chance of ever being anything to her but a competent employee working for a woman infinitely better than him. It was the exact thing the old Michael could never have survived. The old Michael had left Claire precisely because he could not bear to stand beside someone better than himself, and now his entire redemption came down to a single question. Could the new Michael do the thing the old Michael found unbearable? Could he stand beside her greatness, serve it, celebrate it, without needing to diminish it to feel like a man? I'd have to talk to her, Michael said quietly. I couldn't take it unless she truly wanted me there. Not out of pity, not because you arranged it. Only if she genuinely believed I could be useful to what she built. Otherwise, it's just one more time I'm taking something from her she didn't freely give. There was a long silence on the line, and then Alexander Sterling said something that Michael would remember for the rest of his life. You know, Alexander said slowly, the old Michael would have said yes immediately. He would have grabbed the chance to be near her without a single thought for what she wanted. The fact that you just turned down the thing you want most in the world because taking it might cost her something is the most convincing proof I've heard yet that the man I was afraid of is actually gone. A pause. I'll talk to her. The real decision is hers. It always should have been. But Michael, whatever she decides, I want you to know that I no longer think you're a bad man. I think you're a man who was bad and who chose to become something better and did the work and paid the price, and that it turns out is a rarer and more valuable thing than a man who was simply good all along and never had to fight for it. The line went quiet. Michael sat in his small apartment holding the phone, a man who had lost everything and had spent a year building something new from the ruins, and he understood that he stood now at the final threshold of his long reckoning. Not a threshold of triumph, a threshold of testing, the last and hardest test of all. Whether he could love Claire's greatness enough to serve it without needing to possess it, whether he had truly become the man who could stand beside someone better than himself and be glad. He did not know yet what Claire would decide. But for the first time in his life, Michael Whitmore hoped for something without needing it to be about him. He hoped she would say yes, not because it would give him a place near her, but because it would mean she believed finally that he had become someone worth believing in. And he understood sitting there in the quiet that whether she said yes or no, he had already received the only thing that truly mattered. He had become a man who could ask the question the right way. The rest was in Claire's hands now, exactly where it had always belonged. Claire took 9 days to decide. Michael knew the exact number because he counted every one of them, and he counted them the way a man counts breaths in a hospital waiting room. Not because he expected good news, but because the counting was the only thing keeping him steady. He did not call. He did not push. He had learned at last that the greatest respect he could show her was to let her take all the time she needed and to want nothing from the silence except her freedom to fill it however she chose. On the 9th day, his phone rang, and it was not Alexander. It was Claire. Michael, she said. He had to sit down. Her voice sang his name after a year of silence. It undid him a little, and he was glad she could not see his face. Claire, he said. Thank you for calling. Whatever you've decided, I want you to know I'll respect it completely. If the answer is no, I understand. It was never something I had any right to expect. I know, Claire said. That's part of why I'm saying yes. Michael closed his eyes. He did not trust himself to speak. Alexander told me everything he'd watched you do this past year, Claire went on. And at first I didn't believe it. I thought it was a performance, a long game. I thought Michael Whitmore doesn't pick up a stranger's children from school unless there's an angle. So I did something. I hope you'll forgive me for it. I made some calls to Tom at your firm, to your coworker Rosa, to a few others. I asked about you. I asked what you were really like when you thought no one important was watching. Michael's heart pounded. And Rosa cried on the phone, Claire said quietly. She told me you'd covered a month of her rent when her husband was in the hospital, and you'd sworn her to secrecy, and you'd never once mentioned it to anyone or asked for anything back. She only told me because she said you deserved to have someone know. She said whatever that man was, before the man I know now is the kindest person at this company. Claire paused. That's when I believed it. Not because of the grand gesture, because you hit it. The old Michael needed an audience for everything. A Michael who does good things in secret and hides them and asks for nothing. That's not the man I married. That's someone new. I'm trying, Michael said, and his voice broke. I fail all the time, Claire. Some days the old man is right there under the surface. But I'm trying. Every day. Like you told me. The war. I know, Claire said. That's exactly why I'm giving you the job. Not because you've won the war, because you're still fighting it and you've stopped expecting a prize for it. That's the only kind of person I want working for me. Her voice turned crisp professional, the voice of a woman who had built something real and knew exactly what she needed. But understand this clearly, Michael. This is a job. I am your employer. There is nothing else here and there never will be. I have a husband I love and a son who is my whole world, and you are a competent professional who will help my clients and answer to me. If you can live inside those lines cleanly without ever once trying to make it into something more, then there's a place for you. The moment you can't, you're gone. Is that understood? It's understood, Michael said. Completely. I don't want anything more than the chance to be useful to what you built. I swear it. And I'll spend every day proving I mean it. Then start Monday, Claire said. 9 o'clock. Don't be late. And Michael. A pause. Welcome to the company. Try to keep up. We move fast here. And she hung up. Michael sat in his small apartment for a long time holding the phone, and the thing he felt was not triumph, because he had learned that triumph was a poison he could no longer afford. What he felt was something quieter and far more precious. He felt trusted. Not because he had charmed his way to it or bought it or performed it, but because he had spent a year in silence, becoming someone who could be trusted. And Claire, who saw everything, who had always seen everything, had looked at the evidence of 1,000 small, unwatched moments and had decided he was real. It was the greatest honor of his life, and it came with no title, no wealth, no applause. Just a Monday morning and a warning not to be late. Michael was not late. The work was hard, and it was humbling in exactly the way he needed it to be. Claire ran her firm with a brilliance that took his breath away, a brilliance he had lived beside for 10 years and never once bothered to see. She was decisive where he had been reckless kind, where he had been cold, and she had a way of walking into a broken company and finding the human truth underneath the numbers that Michael, for all his experience, had never learned. He watched her work, and he understood, with a clarity that was almost painful, exactly what he had thrown away. Not a simple woman who supported him, a titan he had been too small to recognize. He answered to her, every day. He brought her his work, and she critiqued it sometimes gently, sometimes sharply, and he took the corrections without defensiveness, because he had finally learned that being corrected by someone better than you is a gift and not an insult. And slowly over months, he became good at the job. Not the impressive empire-building version of good he had been before, but a quieter, more useful version. He helped struggling companies survive. He saved jobs. He sat with frightened business owners the way Claire had taught him, and he told them the truth gently, and he helped them find the possibility underneath the wreckage. And every time he did it, he thought, this is what I could have been doing for 20 years if I hadn't been so busy being important. The other twist, the one Michael never saw coming, was Alexander. He had expected at best cold tolerance from the man. What he found over the months that followed was something he had no framework for. Alexander Sterling, the billionaire who could have crushed him without a thought, began slowly to treat Michael not as a defeated enemy, but as a man worth knowing. It started small. A nod in the hallway when Alexander visited the firm. then a question about a client. Then one evening an invitation to stay late and talk through a difficult case. Two men leaning over a table arguing strategy, and Michael realized with a jolt that Alexander was treating him for the first time the way one competent man treats another, as an equal. The very thing Michael had ached for in that restaurant a lifetime ago, the recognition he had been so desperate for, was being offered to him now freely, not because he had won it through power, but because he had earned it through character. "You know what the funny thing is?" Alexander said to him one night as they packed up after a long session. "When I met you in that restaurant, I thought you were the emptiest man I'd ever encountered. All surface, nothing underneath. And now, a year and a half later, I find I actually respect you, which is not something I say lightly, and not something I ever imagined saying about you." He shook his head. "Life is strange, Michael. The men who impress us rarely last, and the ones who last rarely impressed us to begin with." Michael thought about that for a long time, and here is the twist that mattered most, the deepest one, the one the whole story had been building toward. Because as the months turned into a year and Michael settled into his small, useful, honest life, working for the woman he had wronged, respected by the man who had every reason to hate him, he waited for the old ache to return. The ache for more. The hunger that had driven him his whole life, the starving feeling that no amount of success could ever fill. It never came back. That was the miracle. That was the thing Michael could never have predicted. He had spent 52 years believing that the hunger was who he was, that the endless craving for more was the engine of his soul, that a man without ambition was a man without a self. And he had lost everything that hunger had ever chased. And instead of the emptiness he had always feared, he had found waiting underneath the wreckage a fullness he had never known was possible. He was for the first time in his life content. Not happy in the shallow way he had been in the restaurant laughing about the wife he threw away. Content, whole, at peace with a small life full of small kindnesses. And he understood, finally, the thing Claire had tried to tell him in the doorway. It was never the money that had made him miserable, and it was not the loss of money that had set him free. It was the letting go of the lie that he needed to be more than he was. It was the discovery that a man is not measured by what he accumulates, but by what he gives and by who he becomes, and by whether the people around him are better or worse for having known him. By that measure, Michael had spent most of his life bankrupt, and by that measure he was at last beginning to grow rich. There came a day about 2 years after the restaurant that Michael would think of as the true end of his old life and the real beginning of his new one. It was the firm's anniversary celebration. Claire had grown her company into something remarkable, and she had gathered her people to market, and Michael was there not as a guest of honor, not as anyone important, just as one of the team who had helped build it. And at some point in the evening, Claire brought her son. Daniel was 2 years old now, walking laughing, a bright and joyful child who was the center of every room he entered. And at one point in the evening, the little boy toddled across the floor, and for reasons known only to 2-year-olds, stopped directly in front of Michael, and looked up at him and smiled, and raised his arms to be picked up. Michael froze. This was the child Claire had wanted for a decade, the child she had believed she could never have because of a lie Michael had authored and maintained for 8 years. The living, breathing proof that Claire had never been broken, that it had always only been Michael. This child existed as a kind of verdict on Michael's entire life, the final evidence of everything he had cost the woman he had wronged. And the child was reaching up to him, wanting to be held. Michael looked across the room at Claire. She was watching. Of course she was watching. She saw everything, and her face was unreadable, and Michael understood that this was a moment, a real one of the last tests, and that how he responded to it would say everything about the man he had become. He knelt down. He did not pick the boy up because that was not his place, and he had learned at last to know his place. Instead, he knelt to the child's level, and he smiled a real smile, gentle and unguarded, and he said, "Hi there, Daniel. Aren't you something? Aren't you just the best thing in this whole room?" And he meant it. God, how he meant it. There was no jealousy in him, no grief for the child he never had, no bitterness that this boy belonged to another man. There was only a strange, overwhelming tenderness, and beneath it a gratitude so profound it nearly brought him to his knees for real. Because this child, this laughing, radiant child, was the proof that Claire had gotten everything she deserved, that the story had ended right, that the woman Michael had failed had been made whole by a life 1,000 times better than the one he could have given her. And Michael found that this did not break his heart. It healed it. He looked up, and Claire was still watching, and this time her face was not unreadable. There were tears in her eyes, not tears of pain, something else. She crossed the room, and she gently scooped up her son, and she looked at Michael for a long moment, and then she said something very quietly, something meant only for him. "You passed," she said, "the last test. I've been waiting 2 years to see how you'd look at him, and you looked at him with love. No jealousy, no grief for yourself, just love for a child that has nothing to do with you." She shifted the boy on her hip. "That's when I knew Michael. The old you is really gone, a man who can look at the greatest evidence of his own failure and feel nothing but joy that someone he wronged got to be happy. That man is not the man who mocked me in that restaurant. That man is someone I'm actually proud to have working beside me." Michael could not speak. His eyes were wet. "I forgave you a long time ago," Claire said softly, "but I'll tell you something I never thought I'd say. Today, watching you with my son, I don't just forgive you anymore. I'm glad you exist. I'm glad you became this. The world is better with the man you are now in it. And that Michael is the thing you spent your whole life chasing and could never buy. It's the only thing that was ever worth having, to be a person the world is better for." She smiled at him, a real smile, warm and complete, the smile of a woman who had once been thrown away like garbage by a man toasting himself in a restaurant, and who had risen so far above him that she could now look back down with nothing but grace. "Go on," she said. "Enjoy the party. You earned your place here, every bit of it." And she carried her son away back into the warmth of the life she had built, the life Michael had no part in and wanted no part in, except the small, honest part he had finally earned. Michael stood there in the middle of the celebration, a man who had once had everything and lost it all, and he understood at last the full and final shape of his own story. He had walked into a restaurant 2 years ago, the most powerful man he knew, and he had been, though he could not see it, the poorest man in the room. He had had wealth and no character, influence and no love, a name in every magazine and not one single person who would have wept if he vanished. He had been a monster who mistook his cruelty for strength and his emptiness for hunger, and he had toasted himself while mocking the only person who had ever truly loved him. And he had lost it all, the company, the fortune, the mistress, the reputation, everything he had spent his whole life building gone sold for parts forgotten. And in losing all of it, he had found the one thing he had never had, himself, a real self. A self that could kneel down to a child and feel joy with no jealousy. A self that could serve a woman better than him and feel honored instead of diminished. A self that could do good in secret and ask for nothing. A self the world was at last a little better for containing. The people at that party did not know his story. Most of them knew only that Michael was a good man who worked hard and helped people and never talked about his past. And that Michael understood was the most beautiful thing of all. He was no longer known for what he had. He was known for who he was, and who he was, finally, was a person worth knowing. Years later, the people who had once feared Michael Whitmore, the investors and executives and titans of his old glittering world, would occasionally wonder what had become of him. Some assumed he had died in obscurity, ruined and bitter. Some assumed he had clawed his way back to wealth, because men like that always did. None of them ever guessed the truth. That Michael Whitmore had found something better than the empire he lost, that he had spent the rest of his life doing quiet, useful, honest work respected by ordinary people, at peace with a small life full of small kindnesses, having finally learned the lesson that all his money had never been able to teach him. Because in the end, this was never a story about a man who lost his empire. It was a story about a man who was buried so deep beneath his empire that he had to lose every single stone of it before he could finally dig his way out and stand for the first time in the light as himself. Michael Whitmore had believed that night in the restaurant that he had finally built the perfect life. He had been wrong about everything. The perfect life was not the one he lost. The perfect life was the one he built afterward out of the ruins with his own 2 hands, one small, honest choice at a time. And the woman he had thrown away believing she was nothing had turned out to be the greatest teacher of his life. She had shown him by simply becoming everything he failed to value, the one truth that finally set him free. Love is not about finding someone who makes your life look better. It is about becoming someone worthy of the love you were given. Michael had failed that lesson when it could have saved his marriage, but he had learned it at last when it could still save his soul. And a man who learns that truth even late, even after losing everything, even after becoming the villain of his own story, is a man who has not lost at all. He has finally and forever won.